Hey everyone, tonight we're slipping into a world of whispers and steam where the gentle clink of porcelain and the soft curl of tobacco smoke set the stage for some of history's most peculiar arguments. We're leaving behind the clatter of swords and the thunder of empires to settle into the dimly lit corners of an 18th century Istanbul coffeehouse here. Over bitter brews and sweet locum, men debated everything from the best way to tie a turban to the nature of the soul. If you enjoy slow, cozy storytelling that unfolds like steam from a teacup, you're in the right place. Go ahead and like the video if you genuinely enjoy these late-night wanderings. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and maybe what time it is on your clock. Now dim the lights, settle in with a warm drink, and let the hush of Ottoman debate carry you off to sleep. The rise of the coffeehouse. You step through a low wooden door into a narrow room glowing with lantern light. The air is thick with the scent of roasting beans and smoldering amber. Beneath your feet, the earthen floor yields slightly, smoothed by centuries of foot traffic. Every surface bears the patina of conversation, the wax-stripped tables, the burnished on the copper cessers coffee pots, the ingrained stains on the marble slab where the copious cups are served. Welcome to the Ottoman coffeehouse, or kavahin, the true engine of late-night talk in Istanbul around the mid-1600s. Coffee itself arrived in the Ottoman realm only a few decades earlier, as traders carried the first dark cherries from Yemen's highland gardens to the burgeoning port city of Moshe. An army physician in Istanbul reportedly brewed those first local batches around 1554, and within a generation the drink was on everyone's lips. Coffee's bitterness and subtle buzz appealed both to weary scholars, bent over calligraphy, and to shopkeepers tallying daily taxes by lantern light. The very first permanent coffeehouses sprung up around 1555 near the heart of the city's political district. They were simple structures, wood-framed, open-air pavilions with low benches lined against walls, and a few sturdy tables clustered beneath a tarpaulin roof. A pavilion's center stage was a low marble-topped counter, heaped with sand in which metal coffee pots burbled. It was here that you could watch the ritual: a handful of freshly ground beans, water heated over glowing embers, a swirl of foam rising as the brew steeped, an aroma unlike any other drifting through the streets. It wasn't long before these coffee pavilions morphed into true kavahin enclosed rooms, dimly lit by oil lamps, with walls open to the street. Through latticework windows, the patrons who gathered at these tables came from all walks of life. You'd find a weary, low-ranking bureaucrat hashing out the day's impossible tax quotas beside a dervish in simple wool, debating the merits of poetry versus philosophy. Silk-robed merchants haggled over caravan rates at the same corner where unemployed janissaries lounged, nursing second cups and waiting for news from the harbor. But coffeehouses were more than cheap cafes. They had emerged as social institutions. Texts from the period describe them as schools for the people, mektepi hawk, public spaces where one might study mathematics from a wandering scholar, learn the latest coupon of news from travelers fresh off the Grand Bazaar's camels, or simply while away an afternoon in the TikTok world of Shahi, the Turkish chess. Some kavahin even installed small stages for shadow puppetry or storytelling evenings, where a single lantern flickered across a miniature leather screen to bring to life the exploits of legendary heroes. With education scarce in formal schools reserved for the privileged, coffeehouses functioned as ad hoc universities. You might overhear a merchant's son practicing his Arabic script under the tutelage of an aging calligrapher who, for the price of a few coins and a cup of kuki, a frothy, sweetened coffee, would correct each faltering stroke. Even women, though generally barred from these male-dominated rooms, heard of them through the surrounding gossip. Letters mention the concern of mothers fearing their sons would spend fortunes on coffee pavilions instead of studying logic under traditional ulama for the state. This proliferation of public debate proved both a boon and a threat. On one hand, coffeehouses allowed vital news to spread quickly throughout the empire, from court appointments in Topkapi Palace to whispers of famine in second-tier provinces. On the other, authorities fretted that these gatherings harbored sedition. Indeed, a 1633 fatwa banned coffee as an intoxicant worse than wine, and Sultan Murad IV, angry at dissent, famously ordered the execution of some cafe owners and drinkers. Yet the crackdown only pushed coffeehouses underground for a few years. Once the Sultan rode out on his horse, the cups reappeared as though the decree had been written in melting sugar. By mid-17th century, the kavahin had settled its place at the heart of Ottoman urban life. It wasn't simply a dispensary for caffeine, but a crossroads for ideas. Today, when you sip a modern Turkish coffee thick, sugar-laced, grounds settling like sediment at the bottom of the cup, you're tasting the echo of those first debates. You're transporting yourself to the dim glow of a backstreet coffeehouse, where a tapestry of accents and opinions wove into the empire's public consciousness. And yet, as the soft clink of porcelain and the low murmur of voices fills your ears, you might wonder, what exactly did they talk about in those afternoons, when an empire trembled on the brink of change? What curious arguments shaped politics long before newspapers or pamphlets? When you settled into that shadowed corner of the kavahin, you became part of a carefully choreographed social ritual, one that balanced polite deference with the spontaneous spark of debate. A coffeehouse session often began with the simple passing of the says. Sitting low on cushioned benches, you'd wait as the server, sometimes a young apprentice in a patched cotton tunic, brought a tray of small, handleless cups filled to the brim with steaming, syrupy coffee. The apprentice would bow and place each cup before you, nodding silently, then vanish behind lattice screens to refill the portly brass urns. Taking your first sip, you'd feel the concentrated bitterness cut through your drowsiness, followed by the gentle swell of warmth. A pinch of sugar offset the astringency, but if you were bold, you might order sod plain, unadorned coffee and dare to taste its pure essence. Those who preferred something richer might ask for solip, a milky concoction made with orchid root flour. Others traded sugar for a teaspoon of clotted cream or a sprinkling of rosewater. As your eyes adjusted to the flickering oil lamps, the room's hush transformed into a soft tapestry of voices, the quiet scuff of sandals, the drag of a water pipe hose, low laughter echoing off earthen walls. You soon realized the seating itself spoke volumes. Near the counter, in the brightest glow, sat the most frequent patrons' court scribes, low-level clerks, and itinerant scholars who needed a light to read the latest Persian poems smuggled in via caravans. Further back, where the lamplight dimmed and the fire smoke curled thicker, clustered the day's drifters, unemployed scribblers pitching political intrigues, or ex-soldiers nursing bruised pride after years on campaign, despite rigid class divisions elsewhere. Here an articulate porter might spar calmly with a merchant's son over logic puzzles, drawn crudely in the sand. Conversation followed a loose but understood etiquette. You learned quickly that unsolicited arguments bursting into someone else's recited verse with loud protests were frowned upon. Instead, you began by murmuring an opinion when invited, nodding along and keeping your own cup half empty so that the server would refill it and you could savor the process. If someone quoted a line from the 13th century poet Rumi, you might reply with an echo of Sadi or Hafez. If a traveler claimed coffee cured gout, you'd produce an anecdote about a judge in Bursa who allegedly revived an entire caravan of merchants by distributing dozens of cups at dawn. These exchanges were seldom brief. A single point was the Turkish style of tasiography. Coffee ground, reading a reliable divination, could stretch across an hour, threaded with jokes about clumsy cups thrown in mock frustration and punctuated by satisfied as a clever retort scored applause. Even so, most Coverhane sessions weren't The tone remained measured, deliberate, as though participants understood they were crafting public opinion, one careful argument at a time. Behind the laughter and jests lay a far deeper current. You overheard hushed references to court politics. They say the Grand Vizier's son now taxes the caravans at Gallipoli rather more heavily. Or, I heard the Janissaries in Üsküdar mutter that the Sultan's new tax on silk means we may all starve come winter. These tidbits passed from mouth to ear in a chain that moved faster than any official decree. In an age before printing, presses were common. Coffeehouses rather than scriptoriums became the Ottoman bulletin board, but the state too recognized this power. In the 1660s, Sultan Mehmet IV's advisors debated reigning in the Coverhane's influence. They worried that young men, fueled by caffeine and debate, might transform a philosophical quarrel over tactics in a board game into actual mutiny. Pockets of dissent appeared outside public view. Dozens of patrons would slip out after midnight, follow a leader through winding lanes, and convene in a backroom rags and loot society, plotting to overturn local governors. These clandestine cells called themselves the Coffee Conspiracy, and while most plotters were arrested for seditious speech rather than actual insurrection, the rumor of potential revolution fluttered across the city's rooftops. In response, authorities opted for a subtler approach than wholesale bans. They introduced licensed scholarly coffeehouses run by state-approved ulama who specialized in Islamic law. These Coverhane offered free waterpipe tobacco to any patron whose discourse remained within sanctioned religious topics, Quranic exegesis, the proper lineage of caliphs, and the ethics of warfare. By funding these venues, the state siphoned off a portion of the debate, steering it toward piety rather than politics. Other coffeehouses found themselves forced to display official permits above the counters, or face closure by the sultans. Agents yet, even within those licensed walls, patrons found ways to read between the lines. A discussion on haram and halal could be coded criticism of new trade levies. A disquisition on the afterlife quickly morphed into allegories about life under centralized rule. The ingenuity of Coverhane conversations lay in their layered language, the delight of hidden meanings masked by pleasantries and proverbs. By the early 18th century, the Ottoman coffeehouse had matured into a robust ecosystem. Each district in Istanbul boasted dozens of cafes, each with its own niche. Some attracted religious scholars, others favored military veterans, and a few near the docks catered to foreign sailors seeking to trade English pamphlets in exchange for conversation. The shape of each Coverhane, from the width of its benches to the height of its ceilings, mirrored the personalities it held. A narrow cellar cafe, damp and low-roofed, was known for murmured nighttime mythology sessions. A bright, airy hall near atop Belgrade Gate hosted script readings by wandering Armenian clerks. Through it all, coffee remained the lifeblood of Ottoman urbanity. Camel caravans still brought Yemeni beans, while local planters in Anatolia experimented with cultivating their own dark cherries along riverbanks. As you learn from an Anatolian merchant passing through, the beans were often roasted a little longer, producing a sweeter aroma that matched the region's softer water. Each variation sparked debates that roamed free across the benches. Was Syrian coffee stronger than Makkah? Did you prefer the bitter heft of Anatolian roast over the floral notes of Yemen? As morning light finally seeped through the latticed windows, you'd notice the benches near the counter half empty. Many patrons had lingered until dawn. Eyes bright with caffeine's afterglow, voices hushed as they tucked away their final cups. The apprentice swept ash from the hearth and stacked used sesvi with careful efficiency. Euros dusted off straw mats and stepped back into Istanbul's labyrinthine streets, the altitude of debate still ringing in your head. And so that Carvajal endured, a crucible for argument, a haven for storytelling, and the quiet engine of a vast empire's public life. But as you reflect on the state's uneasy truce with these coffee-scented salons, you might wonder what finally loosened their grip on Ottoman society and how those same debates morphed into modern cafes, books, and forums centuries later. When you revisit the Kovahain years later, under the more relaxed rule of Sultan Mahmud I, you notice subtle shifts in its atmosphere. The government's earlier attempts to regiment debate have given way to a wary tolerance. The once omnipresent permits still hang behind counters, yet they bear fewer announcements about closing hours or sermon-led sessions and more proclamations about the coffee tax rate. Rather than patrolling ulama, you see soldiers in crisp uniforms, stepping aside politely to let poets recite their ghazals beneath the lamp glow. Onside one well-known coffee house near the Grand Bazaar, you find a new kind of gathering taking shape. Merchants and travelers still debate politics, but increasingly they also exchange printed pamphlets, triangular flyers, hand-pressed in a small workshop by an Armenian printer. Some flyers announce a lecture on European philosophy, others advertise almanacs with lunar calendars and crop forecasts. By mid-century, Ottoman printers have turned the coffee house into an ad hoc distribution network for the empire's first newspapers and journals. Here, the debates have become a hybrid of oral and written culture. You overhear a young scholar read from a French Ottoman bilingual periodical he borrowed from a Levantan trader. He pauses at an article describing the salons of Paris, comparing them to Istanbul's own salons of his friends, students of medicine, theology, and astronomy all lean in, wanting to know whether Europe's coffee houses facilitated scientific debate as much as poetic recitation. They nod, sip, and discuss the notion of stimulants for mind and tongue with surprising intellectual gravity. But transformation often breeds tension. In some districts, older patrons grumble that the influx of printed matter will dull the Kovahain's oral traditions. Soon we will not know each other's voices, they say, lamenting the loss of intimate face-to-face storytelling. Whispered rumors suggest that certain courtiers, uneasy with newspapers reaching rural Anatolia, have called for renewed restrictions, yet the state hesitates. Banning publications now would risk stifling the economic recovery that followed the Tulip era's later reforms. Indeed, the very changes you observe inside the cafes mirror the empire's own evolution. An Ottoman coffee house that once teetered on the edge of sedition becomes, by the mid-18th century, a barometer of reform and modernization. As new sultans embark on military reorganization, importing European artillery and uniforms, the Kavah remains a place to discuss the latest drill manuals. Mapmakers and cartographers bring their sextants and compasses. You see sketches of fortifications on rough wooden tabletops, some roleplay simulated council meetings, with one patron issuing orders as Grand Vizier while others debate supply lines in Rumelia perhaps. The most striking change is the Kovahain's shifting demographics, where once only men ventured into these hushed halls. You now glimpse women slipping in beside their brothers or husbands, rarely to debate statecraft, but to share news of the latest medical treatise or to consult a herbalist about coffee's suspected healing properties. A handful of wealthy women have even begun hosting private coffee salons in their own homes, inspired by the Kovahain's communal spirit, yet offering a gentler environment for discussing literature and etiquette. Yet beneath these adaptive currents, the Kovahain's essential spirit endures. You find yourself cup in hand recalling an apprentice's gentle nod, the candle's warm flicker across a score of eager faces, the moment when a debate's final insight settled into silence. That essence transcends shifts in politics or technology. It is, at its core, the human impulse to gather, to drink, and to speak truth to one another, however softly. In the final decades of the Ottoman era, as the empire faces mounting external pressures and internal reforms, coffeehouses remain a resilient institution. Even as railroads replaced caravan routes and telegraphs supplanted diplomatic pigeons, the coffee-scented salons adapted rather than vanished. Many became meeting places for young Ottomans and later young Turks, who drafted constitutions in the corners where merchants once debated grain prices. Their hushed signatures on petitions echoed centuries of hushed pamphlets traded over amber cups. By the time the Republic of Turkey emerges in 1923, the legacy of those Ottoman coffee debates lives on. Modern cafes, now furnished with sleek tables and electric lamps, still borrow elements from their ancestors. The zest for brewing, the chibok or narrow neck of the water pipe, and the social contract that elevates quiet conversation above all. Today's patrons, tapping on smartphones or reading newspapers printed in Istanbul's presses, are heirs to those early discussions under oil lamps. As you stand before a modern cafe's bronze-plated CV, you might consider how a simple bean, boiled in water and sugar, could shape the course of public life in an empire that stretched from the Balkans to Basra. That steaming cup once ignited whispers of rebellion, nourished poetry, and carried the seeds of modern print culture, all from the humble crucible of debate in a candlelit corner. And so, as you lift your cup, whether in a 19th century Kavahain or a 21st century coffeehouse, you are part of a continuum of voices, bound by the timeless ritual of coffee and conversation. It is a quiet revolution that continues to pulse beneath the city's hum, reminding you that even the most ordinary daily pleasure can ripple through history. For provoking reflection, consider how today's digital coffee forums, online chats, social media threads, video calls, echo those Ottoman debates. What does it say about our own era that we still seek that familiar blend of warmth, caffeine, and conversation to make sense of the world? The bronze plaque ceremony at the Arbor's court. You step through the carved wooden gateway into the Arbor's court just as dawn's pale light begins filtering through the dense palm canopy overhead. The palace compound is a constellation of low-slung huts with thatched roofs and open wooden verandas, each painted in vivid reds and ochres that gleam softly in the emerging sun. The air, still cool from the night, carries distant calls of the city's guards, clacking their wooden swords in practice, and the muffled tramp of textile porters arriving from the eastern ward. In the center of this courtyard, beneath a canopy of woven ivory cloth, stands the raised platform known as the Igoku, where, twice each generation, the Arbor's court holds its most solemn ritual, the bronze plaque ceremony. You smooth the medan grass floor beneath your bare feet and approach the platform's edge, where a dozen quiet attendants stand at formal attention. Their bodies are painted in broad stripes of white clay and red earth, patterns denoting rank and lineage within the palace's service families. At their backs hang coiled bronze chains once used as currency, now reserved purely for ceremonial display. Their faces, carved in expressionless dignity, hold the weight of centuries of tradition behind them. On the polished ebony surface of the Isha lie stacks of thin, rectangular plaques cast in bronze and polished to a muted luster, others still bearing the ashen patina of the furnaces from which they emerged. Each plaque measures roughly the height of a man's forearm, embossed with relief scenes and clan emblems, rows of warriors with flaring headdresses, courtiers bearing bowls of ivory beads, and mythic leopards prowling beneath royal thrones. The plaques are not merely decorative, they are memory keepers, their images narrating triumphs and tragedies, lineages and legacies. As you settle on a wooden stool crafted from Morocco, the air stirs, and a hush descends from the eastern approach. The sound of elephant-hide drums begins a slow, rhythmic heartbeat pulsing through the court. The drums summon every eye, including yours, toward the palace's main entrance, a great arch carved with leafy vines and leaping crocodiles. The Arbor, resplendent in his beaded coral regalia, emerges a towering figure draped in crimson cloth, his head crowned with a tall cylindrical cap encrusted with shells. His presence is at once formidable and serene. With measured footsteps, he ascends the platform's steps. Two attendants kneel before him, offering bronze plaques as if presenting pages from the kingdom's living chronicle. The Arbor reaches out, selecting one with a slender finger, examining its design by the glimmer of morning light. The crowd breathes with him a single, collective exhalation. You sense that each plaque carries a story too weighty to speak aloud, a peace treaty negotiated with a distant chief, the birth of a prince under an auspicious moon, or a distant war's sorrow. Once chosen, the Arbor's hand lifts, and he presents the plaque to the chief priest of the Emoten cult, who stands beside a low altar adorned with sprigs of bitter cola and bowls of palm wine. The priest traces the reliefs lined with reverent fingertips, whispering a prayer in pidgin, invoking ancestral guardians whose favor must be secured before the bronze can truly assume ritual power. The palm wine is poured in a thin stream. At the plaque's base, a libation to seal the pact between past and present. As this offering unfolds, you observe subtle shifts in the court's mood. The style chatter of guards and servants fades into disciplined silence. The courtiers, draped in indigo cloth and ivory necklaces, bow their heads, while the Arbor's musk-scented attendants adjust their embroidered cloth headbands. You feel the weight of centuries settling around you too, each plaque a tangible link in the unbroken chain of the dynasty. At the ceremony's heart lies a paradox. These bronze tablets are both inert metal and living history. They are cooled from molten flames yet kindled by the words spoken over them. In an empire judged by its courtly splendor and martial prowess, these plaques exemplify that a kingdom's true might lies as much in memory and ritual as in spears and cuirasses. Soon, the chief priest hands the plaque back to the oba, who replaces it among the growing mosaic that lines the court's western wall. The reliefs there form a patchwork map of recently completed campaigns and diplomatic triumphs. You recognize a scene perhaps from a childhood story depicting the famed warrior Emotan disguised as a market woman, leading invading soldiers into a trap. Nearby, a plaque celebrates the Bakers Guild who supplied the palace during a 2-month siege, eating thousands of cassava loaves by candlelight. The oba steps back, surveying the assembled testament of his reign. A murmur runs through the crowd, a mixture of pride and awe. As you consider the slow unfolding of ritual and the deliberate passing of each plaque, a question arises. How did this steadfast ceremony begin? And who first decreed that metal images should bear the oba's history? What was the founding moment when word and bronze were bound together to convey authority? You remain on your wooden stool as the oba's attendants begin the slower, softer portion of the ritual. The elephant hide drums have fallen silent, replaced by the hollow resonance of slit gongs struck in a steady 2-bit pattern. Their echo drifts across the courtyard, slipping between rows of courtiers and servants, reminding you of each breath you've held. The morning sunlight, which once glowed pale and diffuse, now slants more sharply, picking out dust motes in the air and gilding the edges of carved wooden columns. Next, the oba gestures toward a second table laden with fresh plaques newly cast that very night in the palace foundry. You remember the glow of molten bronze spilling from clay molds, the pungent tang of charcoal smoke, the hush that fell when the first pour began just hours before dawn. Those craftspeople, their faces, mottled with soot and sweat, must have labored beneath the same thatched canopy you now observe. Though far from this courtly pageantry, yet here, their labor is honored and transformed. An attendant steps forward, bearing a bronze plaque engraved with a scene seldom displayed in public. Tradesmen negotiating grain and ivory on the capital's outskirts. The relief shows men leaning over low tables heaped with millet stalks and carved tusks, their bodies coiled into earnest gestures. The oba receives it thoughtfully, then lifts his arm to present it to his senior advisor, the Ias. The Ias, a towering figure in indigo, cloth and coral beads, holds the plaque at shoulder height, turning its face toward the gathered court, as if revealing a sunlit tapestry. Whispers ripple. This plaque commemorates last month's treaty with the Olik Bunmiavag, a grain-foreign pact that sharpened Benin's economy. As the IIS places the plaque in a recessed niche beside the earlier ones, you glimpse children of palace artisans peering wide-eyed from behind pillars. Their curious faces are streaked with clay, hinting at an apprenticeship in the next generation of plaque makers. They will grow accustomed to the slow drip of rituals like this, where metal images are read like scrolls of law and lineage. Now the oba steps back entirely. He raises his coral staff, an emblem of authority carved with ancestral faces, and strikes the ground 3 times. The sound reverberates in your chest, a physical pulse that quickens your heartbeat. 2 senior priests step forward, carrying carved wooden bowls filled with red ochre and powdered charcoal. With slender sticks, they dust each newly installed plaque, red on the warriors' shields, black on the traders' garments, accentuating details in the reliefs. The color seals the bronze, binding meaning and memory in pigment. You notice how each edition elongates the court's visual chronicle. What began as a dozen plaques at dawn has grown into more than 30, each story overlapping the next. The courtiers exchange approving nods. Even the palace hounds lie quietly at their feet, as if respecting the gravity of this living archive. After the priests finish coloring, a lone flutist steps forward, her breath sighing through a slender ivory instrument. The melody is simple and plaintive, evoking distant palm groves and the lapping of lagoons at dusk. You close your eyes and imagine those shore's canoes pressed into still water, nets heavy with fish, fires crackling under a blanket of stars. This soft music, paired with the gleaming plaques, reminds everyone that the oba's authority arises not only from force of arms, but from the steady rhythms of trade, art, and ritual. When the last note fades, the oba raises his hand in benediction. A hush falls once more, and the courtyard seems to hold its breath. You consider the transformation you've witnessed, raw metal melted and molded in forges, then elevated by ceremony into symbols of statecraft and solidarity. Each plaque now bears not only scenes of war and negotiation, but the careful attentions of priests, the steady hands of artisans, and the open eyes of apprentices. And yet, for all its gravitas, a subtle question arises. How did the court determine which stories merited bronze and which were left to fade into memory? Who chose to immortalize the tradesmen rather than the midwives or the basket weavers? As you lean forward, curious, the oba turns away. The ritual complete for now, though the plaques will stand for years to come. What everyday tales might still await their turn on these bronze canvases? You settle back onto your wooden stool as the final hues of ochre and charcoal rest upon the newly installed bronze plaques. The late afternoon sun has dipped lower, and the courtyard's elongated shadows draw quiet lines between the columns. The obus court has shifted from the punctuated rhythms of ceremony into a gentle stillness, like the hush after rainfall on the palace's mud brick walls. A final attendant steps forward, bearing a bronze bowl of warm palm oil. With a long-handled spoon carved from ivory, he pours the oil in thin streams along the edges of each plaque, creating a subtle sheen that catches the stray candle glow. The palm oil both preserves and highlights the relief's intricacies, the folds of traders' garments, the etched form of a warrior's helmet, the delicate patterning of a court musician's lute. As the oil seeps into the metal, you feel the centuries-long pulse of this tradition. Each plaque is not merely an ornament but a living testament, bronze as memory, ritual as architecture of time. The attendants move deliberately, their sleeves trailing over straw mats, their bare feet whispering across the courtyard floor. Even the palace hounds, now roused from their repose, pad softly around the edge, as if paying obeisance to the court's silent witnesses. The OBA approaches the final wall where the earliest plaques were installed, those depicting founding, myths of Benin's origins, of Oranmian's arrival and the laying of the first palace stones. His gaze lingers on the oldest bronze, its relief worn by countless ceremonies past. The ironwood frame creaks slightly under the weight of accumulated offerings. Standing before that first plaque, the Obe raises his eyes to the assembling crowd. With a graceful bow, he signals that the ceremony is at an end. Courtiers straighten their cloaks. Attendants begin to remove the small offering bowls, little clay pots that once held palm wine, cola nuts, and crushed pepper. The courtyard, now bathed in the warm glow of dusk-lit candles, seems both heavier and more serene. You rise with the others, sensing that something has subtly altered. The decorative bronze plaques, once separate tokens, now form a single narrative thread, weaving together war, trade, ritual, and governance. They offer a panoramic account of the Oba's reign as military victories, diplomatic negotiations, artistic patronage, and religious devotion. Standing amid this visual chronicle, you recognize how the ceremony has both affirmed the Oba's authority and shaped the collective memory of his subjects. As the crowd disperses, you pause by the plaque depicting the Grainforian Treaty. You remember the earlier hush when that relief was revealed, how the EOS's steady hands had displayed those merchant figures with reverence, how onlookers had whispered about the pact's implications for ordinary livelihoods. Now, fingers lightly brush the plaque's cool surface, connecting the everyday toil of traders to the grand ritual of state. Reflecting on this, you wonder how many similar ceremonies have unfolded beyond these walls. In distant provinces, local chiefs may have commissioned their own bronze markers, but none carried the same weight as those in Benin City's royal court. Here, plaque casting and installation were inseparable from courtly ritual metalwork elevated to liturgy, craftsmanship woven into the fabric of governance. You recall the foundry fires from Story 1, the rhythmic hammering of brass ingots, the apprentices learning to knead clay for molds. Each step of plaque creation, casting, engraving, coloring, oiling was both practical and symbolic. The foundry's heat mirrored political tensions, the engraver's chisel carved social contracts. The priest's pigments consecrated the monarchy's moral authority, and the OBA's benediction sealed those meanings in bronze. Walking toward the palace's eastern gate, you pass under the carved doors that once served as the final guardians of these memories. Their lintels bear scenes of ancestral kings, monkeys, leopards, and hunters, all reminders that the court's visual archive extends beyond formal plaques to include myriad art forms. You glimpse a woodcarver's apprentice polishing a guardian figure, and you realize that every material, bronze, ivory, wood, carries its own ritual resonance. As dusk deepens, you are left with a thought that hums like the echo of the slit gongs. The most enduring power of the plaque ceremony lies not in the metal itself, but in the shared act of remembrance. Bronze may endure, but memories survive through repeated rituals, through the turning of seasons, the enthroning of new abas in the watchful eyes of every courtier and servant. How will future generations know which stories mattered most, and which lives were worthy of bronze? In the end, the plaques remain mute unless the living continue to gather beneath the palace beams, to reenact these ceremonies, and to remember. You step through the low archway of the old guild hall long after its forge fires have cooled. The damp air presses gently against your cloak, carrying the faint temps of aged clay molds and faint echoes of hammer strikes. The building's earthen walls, once brightened by plaster and decorated with guild insignia, now bear streaks where rain seeped through the thatched roof and mingled with centuries of smoke. You can almost imagine the midday sun slanting through narrow windows, illuminating floating motes of bronze dust as apprentices practiced their craft on long wooden benches. In its heyday, this hall housed one of Benin City's most revered collectives, brassworkers who molded not only metal but also the city's identity. Their guild, known in the Edo tongue as the Ekami, numbered among its members master casters, mold carvers, smelters, and ritual priests. Each bore responsibility for distinct phases of bronze production, from sourcing and refining or to polishing and consecrating finished plaques. When brass glowed in the furnace's heart, the guild hall hummed with industry. You wander past the remains of work tables littered with metal filings and sherds of broken molds. Along the north wall, a faded chalk sketch depicts the stages of the lost wax method: hot wax poured over clay cores, clay packed around the wax melted free, and molten brass poured into the resulting cavity. The sketch is overlaid with notes in stylized Edo script, financial tallies for brass and beeswax, schedules for communal festivals when new plaques would be presented at the palace, and oaths sworn by each guild member to uphold secret casting formulas. These formulas were jealously guarded family heirlooms, passed from generation to generation. No newcomer could join the Ekami without presenting a vow of loyalty sealed in ritual. They swore before ancestors' altars, their right hands pressed onto the warm bronze of a virgin casting, their left hands holding a calabash of palm wine. Then was the neophyte's thumb mark imprinted onto the guild's membership plaque, a bronze token that granted access to communal gildens and workshops. You crouch by the floor where footprints of clay still linger. Some are broad and flat, likely those of the master smelters who carried heavy troughs of molten metal. Others are small and precise, the delicate steps of wax modelers who carefully shape the finest details. Tiny attendants in procession, the curved horns of ritual horns, the sinuous coils of royal regalia, and here a single prince stumbles, a momentary loss of balance that may have marked an apprentice's first test pouring brass. Apprenticeships lasted decades. To forge one's name in bronze was to accept a lifetime of repetition, precision, and ritual. Beyond the work area, you discover the guild's inner sanctum, a walled chamber once reserved for spiritual matters. The floor is covered in concentric circles of crushed kola nut and ground camwood forming protective charms. Along the walls, niches held small bronze statuettes of Oranmi and Oaken, and the royal ancestors or deities and kings invoked to bless each casting. A single clay lamp, half filled with palm oil and a length of twisted cotton wick, still rests on a low shelf. Its charred rag droops as if the last priest's fingers had just released it, leaving the sanctum in gentle darkness. You trail your fingers across the cold clay altar, noticing a tiny carved indentation in the shape of a lion's paw. According to guild lore, any brass worker who crafted a piece bearing that secret mark would be guaranteed success. No miscast, no crack, no incomplete pour, yet few masters admitted using it. To reveal the mark publicly would risk that protective power. Even its very existence blurred the line between craftsmanship and magical intervention. The guild's decline began with the arrival of coastal traders. European merchants brought new metals: copper, pewter, even brass, sheet imported from as far away as Holland. They offered it at low prices, undermining local ore extraction. A generation later, palm wine taxes imposed by distant colonial officials drained the small communal pots used for ritual welds. By then, some young artisans had migrated to new towns, seeking contracts with missionary schools or colonial offices willing to pay in hard currency. The guild hall, once crowded with energetic smiths, fell silent. You close your eyes and imagine the steady rhythm of hammer on anvil, the deep clangs echoing like the heartbeat of the palace itself. You imagine the whisper of clay chips as molds were trimmed and the smoky breath of furnaces breathing life into metal. Yet now, the only sound is distant bird call beyond the crumbling perimeter, and a faint drip of water from a fractured roof tile. Near the door, you discover a ledger bound in animal hide, its iron ring still intact but pages curled with age. The entries list not only names and dues but also an odd notation, hymn for the last casting, followed by a date. That ceremony marked the final tribute of the guild to a departing orba, but its cast plaque never reached the palace. The entry ends abruptly. Master Ebi, he placed mold's key within, and then a blank space. The legend holds that Ebi, the guild's oldest master, vanished the next morning. His final act of secrecy preserved the guild's greatest formula, but also sealed its fate. What happened to Master Ebi, and what became of that final mold? Was it buried, hidden, or lost to riverbank erosion? Without it, the guild's secret heart may have been swept away entirely. You stand in the door's threshold, ledger in hand, pondering the fate of that lost casting. The west wind shifts, carrying the hush of the estuary. If you listen closely, you may still hear the echo of hammer blows, calling you back to a time when brass glowing in the forge defined both craft and kingdom. You lift the leather-bound ledger, with a careful hand, brushing away a small pile of clay dust from its cover. Its empty final line, Master Ebi placed mold's key within, seems to beckon you forward, as if daring you to finish the sentence centuries later. You settle onto a broken bench, the air still thick with the memory of smelted metal, and open the volume to the page before the abrupt blank. The entries preceding it reveal Ebi's meticulous accounting. Hours spent at each furnace, quantities of charcoal and palm kernel shells consumed, the precise ratio of copper to zinc in every alloy. His handwriting, once flowing, grows shakier. As you approach the final service to Orba Ogula, that single shaky loop in his signature stands out an unintentional farewell. Perhaps, or a tremor born of age and sorrow, Ebi was no ordinary master. He had apprenticed under his own father. who had himself learned from a woman named Ozer, the only known female caster in living memory. Ozer's line ended with Ebby's generation, and he bore the weight of her techniques as both tribute and burden. Oral tradition speaks of Ebby's unusual devotion to lunar phases. He refused to pour new metal during full moons, believing that the moon's glow weakened brass grains. On crescent nights, he held solitary rites at the riverbank, dropping iron nails into water to invoke protective spirits of the deep. Such subtleties and recorded in official annals hint at a man for whom metallurgy was inseparable from mystery. Your thoughts drift to the Guildhall's sanctum, its altar of cola, and camwood still resonant with damp magic. There, beneath the charred oil lamp and silent statuettes, Ebby and his closest circle convened before each major casting. The Guild's ritual book, thought lost during the city's upheaval, described a ceremony called MLR, the Gathering of Iron. On the eve of that final service, witnesses said the air in the chamber crackled with expectancy. A brass censer burned fragrant resin. Apprentices knelt at Ebby's feet as he recited invocations in low, measured tones. Then, as the palm wine offerings were poured at the altar's base, he pressed the mold's bronze key, a small medallion inscribed with a lion's point to the clay floor, sealing it until the next day. That next morning, Ebby was gone. The apprentices found his anvil cold, his tongs neatly placed beside the last wax model. The clay imprint of his key remained, but could not be pried free without shattering the floor. Attempts to retrieve it risked damaging the hidden mold beneath, rather than disturb the sanctified space. The guild elders ordered the chamber sealed. They left only a small gap, a narrow slit etched into the clay wall, through which they delivered daily libations of palm wine and libations of millet porridge, hoping Ebby's spirit would remain appeased. Without Ebby's guiding hand, the foundry's fortunes dimmed. Younger masters tried to replicate his reckoning by the moon, but failed to capture the same alloy clarity. One by one, apprentices left a trade drawn by colonial employment or fleeing to coastal towns where European sheet brass shone more easily. Within a decade, the communal kill stood cold. The inner sanctum collapsed into ruin, its offerings spoiled, its protective charms broken by time's steady decay. You gaze over the ledger's worn pages. On the facing page of the final entry, an older note written by the guild's chief scribe offers a clue. It records a clandestine meeting with an emissary of the Portuguese trader. João das Águas, the scribe, appears to have received a pouch of imported glass beads in exchange for detailed instructions on refining amber brass. That transaction, deemed illicit by the Obas court, may have marked the beginning of the guild's unraveling. The scribe's tone is apologetic, hinting at fear of imperial censure. He begs Ebby's forgiveness, though it remains unclear whether Ebby ever learned of the betrayal. Could Ebby have fled in shame over his own lineage's compromise? Might he have hidden the ultimate mold to protect its integrity from foreign influence? Or did he disappear under more ominous circumstances, perhaps swallowed by the river itself, as whispered in later tales? The ledger's margins hold faint water stains, suggesting the pages spent time near damp earth or flooded ground. A second cruder hand scribbles river's call beside the final blank line. Stepping outside the hall, you follow the overgrown path toward the Benin River. Tall grasses brush your calves. The late afternoon sun, slanted and soft, spills through gaps in the foliage, casting flickering patterns that evoke dancing bronze embers. At the water's edge, currents swirl around half-submerged clay shards, perhaps remnants of discarded molds. A thin wooden raft, tied to a post, lists gently. Could it have borne Ebby downstream? Or was it built for a secret nocturnal voyage, carrying the precious mold away from prying eyes? You peer into the river's murky reflection, half expecting to glimpse a candlelit forge flicker beneath the surface. The current hushes as you step closer. You recall that glass-beat ledger entry and wonder whether Ebby's sense of duty compelled him to protect the last mold from exploitation. If so, he might have entrusted it to river spirits, those same deities once invoked in the MLR rite. To this day, elders say that fishermen sometimes haul up brass flakes tangled in nets like fragments of something much larger. Corroded by time and salt. Beyond the riverbank, you'll notice a small island crowned with palms and wild grasses. Local fishermen avoid it at night, claiming it's haunted by a ghostly smith hammer echoes drifting across the water. On moonless nights, they say, you can hear the rhythmic tap of a spirit's hammer, forging praise for a king long gone. Some villagers leave offerings of kola nut at the shoreline, hoping to placate Ebby's restless shade. Though Ebby vanished, his legacy endures in scattered plaques that survived centuries of war and colonial looting. Many now adorn museum walls far from Benin City, their intricate reliefs bearing silent witness to the guild's artistry. Yet none carry the lion's paw mark, the secret signature Ebby swore would protect the guild's heart. In the absence of that mark, scholars debate the guild's final techniques. Some speculate that the lion's paw medallion lay hidden at the bottom of the river, lost forever. Others search private collections for a stray marking that might solve the riddle. You turn back to the ruined guild hall, its door yawning like an open mouth. Perhaps the only way to know Ebby's fate is to re-enter the sanctum, chisel away its sealed walls, and risk sacrilege in pursuit of truth. Or maybe the mold's power demands that its final secret remain buried, allowing the guild's memory to survive only in fragmented artifacts and whispered stories. As twilight deepens, you light the single clay lamp near the entrance. Its flame trembles in the evening breeze, casting dancing shadows across the cracked plaster. The old stone walls seem to lean closer, eager for your next step. The question remains, will you disturb the sanctified floor and unearth the final key, or will you honor the guild's tradition of secrecy, leaving Ebby's last act shrouded in mystery? You return to the sealed inner chamber one last time, lantern in hand. The clay floor remains unbroken, the narrow slit still offering only whispers of what lies beneath. Around you, the space feels smaller, as though the walls have drawn closer to guard their secret. The mingled scents of stale oil and decaying offerings tingle in your nostrils. You peer through the slit and imagine the mold, its unseen bronze contours waiting, suspended between oblivion and revelation. Earlier that day, you located a fragment of Ebby's medallion wedged between floorboards in the main hall's loft. The lion's paw, etched shallowly into its copper surface, bore his final admonition in the ancient dialect: preserve the vessel, protect the voice. Those words now resonate with new urgency. The mold is not merely a tool but a vessel for ancestral memory. A voice that speaks of Oba Ogwala's reign and the souls of those who poured their lives into its creation. Drawing from that realization, you decide to reenact the MLR rite, honoring Ebby's tradition one last time. You gather the scattered cola nuts and camwood chips from the Guildhall shrine, and fill a crude brass bowl with fresh palm wine. Kneeling before the sealed door, you place the lion paw fragment on the bowl's rim and recite Ebby's Luna invocation in measured tones. At each phrase, you tap the bowl's edge with a wooden mallet, producing a faint, hollow ring that echoes through the chamber. A sudden breeze stirs the candle's flame, though no window stands open. The shadows dance as if beckoning. You slip a tallow-soaked wick through the slit, holding it close to the clay. Heat and wax cascade into the crevice, covering the hardened clay in a thin film. The wax seeps into fissures, hardening to seal. The sorrows of time. Then, guided by Ebby's final ledger entry, you trace the lion's paw pattern onto the wax in act of communion, closing the circle. For a moment the chamber seems to pulse with warmth, as if recognizing your fidelity to its hidden covenant. The oil lamp flickers, and you swear you hear a soft hammering, distant and gentle, like an echo from the river's depths. Whether hallucinatory or real, that rhythmic tap reminds you of the smith's devotion, his life's work engraved in bronze and myth. With the rite complete, you step back, the brass bowl at your side now empty of offerings but full of silent gratitude. The chamber has surrendered nothing physical, yet you feel that you have fulfilled Ebby's unspoken charge. The mold remains concealed, but perhaps that is exactly where it belongs. Its power is neither to be wielded nor exposed. It is to be respected, preserved in legend and in the flicker of candlelight that still guards the foundry's heart. Over the following weeks, small discoveries begin to surface. In the debris near the riverbank, artisans recover corroded fragments of Ebby's key, which they reinter alongside cola and camwood at the foot of a newly erected shrine. The Guildhall, once abandoned, is carefully stabilized. Community members lay fresh boards over rotted beams and patch cracks in the roof, creating a shelter for future generations to learn of their heritage. Local storytellers gather beneath the palms, weaving Ebby's tale into evening firelit gatherings, turning his disappearance into a teaching parable about humility, respect, and the limits of human knowledge. Archaeologists arrive, invited by the Orba's descendants, not to excavate but to document the site's architecture and collect oral histories. They record elder stories of Ebby's lunar ceremonies, of apprentices who vanished along with him, and of brass flakes found tangled in fishermen's nets. Museums begin to contextualize surviving plaques, emphasizing the guild's ritual secrecy rather than simply displaying the reliefs as ornamental art. A renewed respect blooms for the intangible aspects of brass working, the prayers, the rites, the living tradition that preceded every pour of molten metal. You attend one such symposium at the palace courtyard. Beneath the veranda's carved beams, artisans demonstrate lost wax casting on raised braziers. Their tools are simpler than Ebby's elaborate furnaces, yet the reverence in their movements echoes his own. They dip wooden ladles into molten brass, offering a prayer to the river spirits before transferring the metal to wax forms. Then, as cooled molds are cracked open, they reveal small reliefs of leopards, fish, or stylized masks, miniature homages to ancestral motifs. Each unveiling is met with gentle applause, as though the community collectively celebrates Ebby's legacy through these humble successors on the hush of the evening. You return to the riverbank one last time. The moon, now waning, casts a pale path across the water. You place a single brass shard picked from broken pottery near the foundry into the current and whisper a final prayer. Guide Ebby's spirit home, keeper of the mold's song. The shard drifts away, carried by currents older than memory itself. Its destination is unknown, perhaps the deeper delta, perhaps the vast ocean beyond. yet you sense that Ebby's truth travels with it, shared between water and metal, spirit, and story. As you walk back to the emptied guild hall, a calm certainty settles over you. The mold, hidden, eternal, impossible to own, fulfills its purpose by remaining out of reach. Its final location, whether buried beneath clay or adrift in river silt, becomes part of the communal myth, teaching that some mysteries are meant to endure, not for human conquest but for reverent awe. Behind you, the lantern's glow fades in the distance. Ahead, the door to the inner chamber awaits future seekers, those who might one day rediscover Ebby's secret when the time, the moon, and the heart are in perfect harmony. And so the lost guild of brass workers remains, not lost but alive, in ritual and remembrance. Its greatest artifact preserved not in bronze alone but in the enduring power of respect, humility, and the quiet dignity of traditions kept sacred. As you wait outside the sealed palace gates, the echo of drumbeats lingers like a distant heartbeat, and you recall the hushed conversations among palace pages about what lies ahead. Beyond those gates, the Ober's procession winds through the city's winding lanes, past merchants rearranging wares and children pausing their street games to stare in reverent awe. The entire capital becomes a stage, each bystander an unwitting actor in this royal pageant. To delve deeper into these rituals is to understand not only the Ober's authority but also how the people of Benin City lived in perpetual negotiation with a monarchy that both dazzled and regulated every facet of urban life. Inside the palace courtyard, you slip through a side entrance reserved for visitors of moderate rank and enter a quieter space where preparations continue. Here, chiefs' wives arrange their coral necklaces in precisely measured loops, each coil signifying a married woman's familial alliances. They whisper counsel to one another, slight adjustments to headdress height when the Ober passes, or the correct timing to lower their fans in deference. Even in these intimate chambers, etiquette dictates every movement is a reflection of the Ober's reach nearby. A group of ivory carvers works on ornate plaques, miniature rehearsals of the grand parade itself. They etch tiny spearman drummers and parasol pages into bone tablets, each stroke guided by patterns handed down from a master carver decades prior. The carvers speak of past processions from which they drew inspiration. A coronation 50 years ago marked by torrential rain that soaked the Ober's robes, causing the coral beads to stain his ivory collar a ruddy hue. Those stained beads were carefully removed afterward, as if to erase a blemish on the monarchy's pristine narrative. You approach one of these carvers, an elderly man whose brow furrows in concentration as he chisels a drum motif. He pauses to offer you a scrap of charcoal and gestures to a half-finished plaque. "See here," he says quietly. "The drummers are too close to the spearmen, a mistake's sacrilegious proximity. They will be corrected after the festival." His words reveal that even the smallest figurines in private workshops must adhere to court standards. A misplaced symbol could anger ancestral spirits or invoke gossip among palace informants. Your attention shifts to a side corridor where palace scribes record the day's events in ledger, books bound with leather covers. They note which dignitaries attended, the precise length of the procession measured in paces, and even the ambient temperature believed to influence the Ober's comfort and, by extension, the kingdom's prosperity. On previous days, these scribes recorded that when temperatures dipped below 25 degrees Celsius at noon, the Ober's favorite umbrella bearer would pause mid-procession to request a handful of natural salt set to ward off spiritual chill and maintain the divine warmth around the king. Nearby, a group of eunuchs rehearses their positions. As men whose roles straddle the boundary between intimacy and anonymity, eunuchs occupy a unique niche in court life. They stand between folded ranks of nobles and common attendants, their expressions inscrutable, although they lack independent titles. Eunuchs wield soft power, passing messages between the Ober and envoys, or adjusting the king's robe sleeves with a discretion none dare match. You overhear their captain instructing a newcomer on how to tilt his head at exactly 4 degrees during the salute. Deviations risk being noted by palace observers, who tally ritual infractions for the ABA's daily brief. In another chamber, the royal cooks prepare a procession feast. Small clay bowls filled with mashed yams, spiced with palm oil and ground pepper, are arranged on woven trays. Late in the afternoon, these snacks will be offered to visiting chiefs lining the route. Each guest receives exactly 3 scoops, no more, no less, in a custom dating back centuries when a former OBA attempted to placate a hungry retinue with an extra ladle, only to offend them by suggesting they were greedy. That misstep has since become a cautionary tale. Abundance must never overshadow restraint and royal generosity. You pause at a doorway, where palace musicians rehearse a processional hymn. They sing in a calandre response style, alternating between low-pitched chants and lighter vocal flourishes. Their lyrics, written in archaic court dialect, pay homage to the Ober's lineage and the city's founding myths. Today's practice is meticulous. If a chanter lingers too long on a vowel, it is considered a breach of phrase structure, believed to invite discord into the royal aura. Singers correct one another in hushed tones, their voices weaving around clay amphory and loamy earth floors as the afternoon light shifts toward dusk. As the hour approaches for the return procession, when the OBA re-enters the palace to conclude the ceremonial journey, guards begin to reposition. Flint torches are lit along the walls, their flames flickering against carved doorposts. You sense a change in atmosphere, anticipation entwined with relief that the public spectacle will soon recede behind the palace's stone ramparts. Pages retrieve the umbrellas and ornate pillows from storage, brushing off stray dust and whispering words of encouragement to one another. Steady, hands, watch for the embers, mind the collars. Moments later you see the glimmer of brass and ivory returning through the archway. The drummer's tempo is more buoyant now, signaling celebration rather than solemnity. You stand, heart stilled by the slow, reverent approach of royalty. As the oboe's litter emerges into view, the coral beads catch torchlight, casting faint crimson reflections on the courtyard walls. The oboe himself offers a nada minimal gesture that sets the entire court in motion. Chiefs kneel, women lower their fans, and eunuchs align their robes in perfect symmetry, and then, almost imperceptibly, the procession halts before the shrine of Ogun, the god of iron and craftsmanship. The OBA inclines his parasol leftward this time, acknowledging Ogun's patronage over the metalworkers who fashioned his bronze regalia. As small embers drift from torches and the final hymn ends, a hush falls again thick as before, pregnant with unspoken questions. How did these rituals evolve as Benin's influence expanded? Did chiefs from distant provinces adopt local etiquette, or did they preserve their own customs when they visited the OBA? And as the palace doors swing closed for the night, what hidden conversations now unfold behind those ramparts? When the great bronze doors of the inner court finally close behind the oboe's litter, a muted stillness descends. Torches gutter in the heavy evening air, their golden tongues flickering against carved pillars that glisten like wet ebony. The drummer's steady beat has softened to a distant heartbeat, echoing down corridor after corridor. You find yourself alone among the first to linger, guided only by the pale glow of embers and the faint scent of palm oil smoke. In this hush, the court's true ceremonies quietly begin. First, the oboe's attendants remove the royal parasols and coral collars, in precise sequence. A eunuch kneels before the great bronze throne to untie the knotted cords of the parasol frame. His fingers, skilled from years of practice, worked with deliberate care so as not to crease the sun-bleached fabric trimmed with ivory beads. Beside him, the collar chamberlain gently lifts each strand of coral, each bead heavy with ancestral power, and places them into silk-wrapped boxes lined with rare cowrie shells, believed to absorb residual royalty. As each bead settles, the chamberlain murmurs a quiet blessing. May your burden lighten until dawn. In the rear courtyard, palace pages begin the nightly redistribution of offerings. Clay bowls once holding procession snacks are washed in a central cistern, a stone basin fed by a channeled spring from Ogby waterfall outside the city walls. Water, though cold, is revered for its purifying qualities. Each page dips a handful into the basin, cool droplets splashing against muddy clay as they chant softly, clear the path for morning's light. Cleansed bowls are stacked on low, wooden racks ready for the next day's rites. Meanwhile, the brass bellkeepers conduct their own ritual. Each bell, small enough to hold in a single hand yet heavy in symbolism, was rung during the procession at key points, when passing the OGB gate to herald the OBA's entry into public space, at the crossing of the central plaza to honor the city's founding, and again upon re-entry to affirm the Oba's sovereign presence within the palace. Now each keeper resumes possession of his assigned bell, cradling it against his shirt front as if it were an infant. They gather near the shrine to Olakon, goddess of deep waters, and ring a final 3 times long measured tones that ripple through stone halls like pebbles dropped in calm ponds. With each reverberation, you sense the court's power settling back into the hidden earth where it can slumber until the next dawn. Beyond these central rites, smaller dramas quietly unfold. In the Hall of Tapestries, the master embroiderer inspects the curtain panels that flanked the procession route. These panels depict daily life in Benin City. Fishermen hauling nets, women grinding maize, blacksmiths forging tools, stitched in fine ivory thread against deep indigo cloth. The scenes capture moments you saw earlier amidst the pageantry. The embroiderer's eyeglass lens reflects torchlight as she examines each stitch. A single loose thread so small it escaped even your notice prompts her to lean forward and deftly tuck the fiber back into place. Every detail must align, she reminds her apprentice. The Oba's world must have no frayed edges. Nearby, the palace clerk finalizes the day's record. In a leather-bound codex, he appends a new entry. Procession held in good order. Temperature moderate. No recorded infractions. He dips his quill into an iron gall ink and seals the page with a drop of melted palm wax. As the wax cools, it cracks subtly under the seal, an imperfection deliberately allowed, symbolizing that no human institution is without fault. The clerk then closes the codex and places it in a locked cabinet. its doors secured with brass latches embossed with the obus emblem, a stylized leopard's face, surrounded by looping coral vines. Elsewhere in the palace, the obus personal attendants gather for the final ritual of the day, the quiet offering. Two young women, handmaidens of the Queen Mother, approach the raised dais where a small iron incense burner stands. In slender hands, they carry bowls of powdered camphor mixed with crushed palm fruit pulp. They deposit a teaspoon of this mixture into the burning coals, and pale camphorous smoke spirals upward, brimming with cleansing potency. The Queen Mother herself, seated on a low stool nearby, closes her eyes and inhales deeply. Legend holds she must partake in this quiet offering each evening to sustain the ancestral voices that guide the dynasty's fortunes as the smoke drifts high beneath the vaulted ceiling. You imagine those voices whispering counsel in tongues half forgotten, weaving the past into each new decision. In the palace kitchens, a different form of closure unfolds. The chief cook and her assistants extinguish a ring of small clay lamps around the cooking hearth. Tonight's final meal, pounded yam served with a heady pepper stew, is over, but remnants linger in steaming pots. The cook stirs in handfuls of wild basil, harvested from the palace garden at dawn, believed to aid digestion and restful sleep. As the fragrant herb wilts, she reflects on the day's rhythms, needle tapestries, clanging bells, whispered corrections among drummers. Even the plants must learn their roles, she murmurs, scooping the stew into lidded jars for next morning's first course. By now, the palace's grand audience chambers lie empty, their marble-like floors reflecting only the faint glow of distant torches. The Oba, meanwhile, has retired to his private apartments behind a set of further bronze doors. Those apartments bear the hush of deep reverence, lit only by a single lamp hung low so its amber light can never meet royal eyes directly. There, you are told, the Oba removes his royal sandals crafted from leather stiffened by copper filings, and pauses. He sits at a low stool, a single eunuch standing sentinel in the corner. The Oba drinks a small cup of cool water drawn from a secret well beneath the throne room floor. The water is said to carry the city's essence. Each sip connects him to every street, market, and workshop of Benin. And then, beneath layers of embroidered silk robes and coral collars, the Oba, whose name you have not been permitted to speak, aloud lies upon a mat of finely woven raffia, his slender cane placed within reach. He is the axis around which a city and its people revolve. Yet tonight, like you, he prepares for slumber. Tonight, the many elaborate dealings of court etiquette rest as quietly as the camphor smoke. Outside, the air cools further, so much so that palace guards draw their cloaks tighter. The tiled pathways beneath the ramparts glisten with dew, and the distant drumming has given way entirely to the soft sighing of wind through palm fronds. As you step back through the carved gates and into the shadowed streets, you carry with you the resonance of 1,000 small rituals, the clink of coral beads, the echo of final brass chimes, the faint sizzle of extinguished lamps. Every element you observed, no matter how minute the length of a drumbeat pause. The pitch of a Queen Mother's breath was woven into the tapestry of Benin's royal power. You realize that court etiquette is not mere formality but a living chronicle written in gestures, sense, and soft reverence. In the hush of the night, you wonder, when the next dawn's torchlight rekindles the palace chambers, how many of tonight's subtleties will repeat exactly as before. Will a single misplaced rice grain or an off-kilter step by a page ripple outward, altering the course of tradition? And what of the common people beyond those walls? Do they understand how intimately their lives are mapped onto every knot, chime, and embroidered line of the Oba's procession? The streets lie silent now, but the palace's pulse continues unseen. Tomorrow, as the sun climbs again over the city's ochre-colored rooftops, the cycle of ritual will begin once more. Another procession, another set of measured salutes, another day in which etiquette itself breathes life into the monarchy's enduring story. Reflect for a moment on how these intricate rituals, orchestrated with such precision and deference, sustained a center of power for centuries, and consider what echoes of this ceremonial structure remain in our own modern ceremonies and public spectacles. You step into the dusty courtyard of the Oba's palace just before dawn, when the air still clings with river mist and the first lanterns flicker along the ochre walls. Here, the royal court prepares for a procession, one of the day's few occasions when the Oba himself ventures beyond the palace gates. You, as an invited observer, find your place among palace officials, ivory carvers, and black-clad eunuchs, each arranged with deliberate precision along the central causeway. Before you lies a ritual choreography that has guided Benin's kings for centuries, a subtle ballet of rank, gesture, and whispered commands. The ground beneath your feet is pressed earth, smoothed by generations of sandal soles. To your left, a row of spearmen stands at attention, their bronze-tipped lances held vertical against the pale sky. Each pant leg is sewn to fall exactly 3 finger widths above the Nkela regulation, decree from the Oba's forebears intended to keep trousers free from mud and to streamline the silhouette of martial readiness. These details may strike you as minor, but they matter. A single flap of loose cloth is said to bring dishonor upon the king if observed by a hostile envoy further down. A cadre of drummers readies themselves under a canopy of woven palm fronds. They wear crimson caps embroidered with stylized leopard tokens of royal favor, and their skins gleam faintly with she-Buddha polishing rites performed each evening. The long, low-frequency thump of the lead drum will set the procession's heartbeat, slow and purposeful, allowing even the youngest tambourine bearer time to synchronize. Each tentative shake with the measured steps of the Orba's litter. At the far end of the causeway, the Orba's palanquin stands a covered sedan, fashioned from carved ebony beams and bound with brass straps that shine like captured sunlight. Its sides are pierced with floral lattice work, revealing glimpses of crimson velvet cushions inside. Draped atop is the Orba's personal royal umbrella, an ivory-handled parasol inlaid with brass studs. It stands closed now, but once the Orba boards, a court page will unfurl its canopy in a single, practiced motion, an unspoken signal that the king has assumed his seat and that the procession may commence. You glance at your own attire, a simple cotton wrapper dyed in indigo stripes, its hems unadorned. As a guest of middling rank, you stand several paces back, close enough to glimpse the Orba's beaded regalia, distant enough to avoid his direct gaze. Yet even this position carries protocol. Should the Orba pause his litter to salute a shrine or a passing dignitary, you must kneel on both knees, bow your head low, and keep your hands folded at your chest until the movement is complete. Failure to do so is akin to stepping on ancestral ground with bare feet and unpardonable oversight. Soon, a single herald appears at the procession's head, a eunuch dressed in a patchwork robe of earth tones, carrying a brass staff topped with a stylized crocodile head. With a stentorian call, its words drawn from the ancient court lexicon, summons all eyes toward the gate. The iron bolt rattles, the massive doors groan on their hinges, and a hush falls over the courtyard that feels thicker than any woven textile. Then, emerging into the light, comes the Orba himself. His shoulders are draped in a leopard skin mantle, each spotted pelt meticulously aligned so that the dark patches form a chevron pattern down the back. Beneath, he wears layered coral bead necklaces that clink softly with his weight, and his crown, a carved wood cap encrusted with bronze studs, carries a small finial representing the kingdom's founding ancestor. His face is serene, unmoving, yet the tilt of his head and the slight flex of his fingers reveal a sovereign who remains ever alert to the rhythms of court life. The drummers strike the first resonant boom, and the Orba's litter begins to sway forward, lifted by 8 bearers whose polished porches echo against the stone threshold. You watch as the procession snakes through the gate, the vibrant hues of velvet and beads contrasting with the muted browns of palace walls. Court pages scatter handfuls of white kaolin dust before the litter to cleanse the path, a symbolic act to ensure the Orba's steps remain pure. As the procession unfolds, you begin to notice the small telling gestures, the way a chief's son lowers his chin slightly as he passes the Orba, the momentary glance the pages exchange as they steady a loaded tray of cola nuts, the precise interval each retinue member keeps from the litter, never closer than 2 paces, never farther than 3. Each detail weaves into the tapestry of court etiquette, reinforcing the OBA's elevated status and reminding every participant of the unbroken lineage that led him. Here you've studied these customs in dusty tomes, but witnessing them in motion reveals subtleties that no written description can capture. For instance, when the Orba stops before the shrine of Olakontha, god of the sea, and Wealthy inclines his litter slightly to the left, rather than the right, following a tradition said to honor the deity's preferred orientation. In that split second, a page adjusts the tassel on the ivory parasol to mirror the king's tilt, a silent gesture of unity between mortal and divine. Yet even as you marvel at the precision, you sense an undercurrent of tension. Each newcomer to court must master these rituals or risk dire consequences: demotion in rank, public reprimand, or worse, exile from the city. How many visitors in ages past stumbled upon a forgotten step, only to find themselves cast out, anonymized, and lost among the palm groves beyond the walls? And how did commoners, whose lives barely intersected with palace protocol, perceive these grand displays? Did they regard them as protective barriers of power or as distant pageants divorced from daily hardships? You turn your eyes back to the procession as it disappears from view, the drum beats echoing down the causeway like a fading heartbeat. The courtyard seems emptier now, its dust settling once more into stillness. The palace gates grown shut behind the Orba, sealing away the grand ceremony and leaving, you alone with questions that stir as persistently as ritual itself. What underlay the tension between spectacle and sovereignty? And how did each carefully choreographed gesture serve to both elevate and constrain the people of Benin City? His daily life of a palace servant, you awakened before dawn, stirred not by roosters but by the soft clink of wooden sandals on flagstone. Your own feet, bare and calloused, slip from the thin straw mat that serves as bedroll. Ahead of you lies a day filled with unending tasks, yet in this moment all is still. A single lantern burns low in the hallway outside your small chamber, its wick bowed by hours of flicker. You slip on your plain cotton tunic faded ochre from countless wash, not a narrow sash around your waist. No mirror waits to judge. Your reflection lives in your memory. Dark hair knotted at the nape, skin bronzed by midday sun, eyes shadowed with weariness yet bright with quiet purpose. You leave your room and join the stream of servants converging on the palace kitchens. The air here is damp with morning mist and the lingering ember warmth of the central hearth. Standing shoulder to shoulder with 10 others, you take up your assigned billet, a long wooden paddle for stirring the vast pots of yam porridge that will nourish the royal household. Before you touch a single bowl, a senior cooker, arm scarred by years of tending fire, is already ladling glowing coals into the hearth center, coaxing flame to life. You kneel to add kindling, fingers nimble in the half-light, remembering the rhythm of this exact sequence: wood, ember, bark, flame, dots as the fire breathes. You deliver water from the courtyard well. The bucket is heavy, its rope damp with condensation. You steady the swing of its arc so that few drops spill on the packed earth floor. Nearby, a fellow servant uses a long wooden ladle to transfer water into clay jars. You nod in mutual acknowledgement to no words spoken so early, only the language of shared labor. Once the fires burn evenly beneath 3 enormous iron cauldrons, you set your paddle to work. The yam mash is dense, almost glue-like, and demands relentless stirring to prevent scorching. You grip the paddle midshaft, lean your weight into each push, and feel the pot's heat rise to kiss your forearms. Sparks overhead flit across blackened beams, and the kill smell of smoke and root starch fills your nostrils. All around you, wooden beams drip with condensation. A low chant begins, almost inaudible beneath the cook's coals. He-ho, he-ho, matching paddle strokes as if to guide each rotation. It is said that if this chant falters, the porridge will clump and the Orber's morning repast must flow like silk. While you labor, the junior pages arrive with fresh loaves of coarsely ground millet bread wrapped in banana leaves. Their uniforms are crisp, linen shifts bright as moonlight. Yours hangs limp, stained with soot and sweat. You offer a brief bow as they pass an unspoken hierarchy that governs every corridor. They vanish as quickly as they came, and you return to the rhythmic push and pull of potato-like mash. Sooner, the first bell tolls a deep bronze tone that vibrates through the kitchen's stone walls. It summons you to rise from stirring and prepare for the next task, setting the serving line. You rinse wooden bowls in a trough fed by the same well water, then neatly arrange them on a long bench, 3 rows of 50 bowls each. The senior cook inspects your alignment. Each bowl's rim must face the same direction, angled just so. A crooked bowl earns a tap on its edge and a gentle reprimand. Order and symmetry, she intones, reflect the palace's harmony. By the time the morning lanterns are removed and torches lit along the hall, you have completed your first chore. You step back, sweat beading at your temples, and watch as the royal household gathers in the dining hall. Their footsteps echo on polished stone, and palace musicians begin a soft kora prelude. You gratefully slip away to your next assignment, delivering the used bowls for washing. In the washroom, an enclosed alcove off the main kitchen, a pair of apprentices pour hot water over each bowl, scrubbing away remnants of yam with frayed coconut fiber brushes. You join them in a silent partnership. One rinses, the other scrubs. The water runs cold at first, then warms as another pot of embers is added to an iron kettle. Overhead, a small window admits a sliver of dawn sky, pale and uncertain. A drip, drip, drip echoes from a cracked tile above. You brace a hand against the wall to steady yourself and feel the pulse of exhaustion in your calf muscles. The clay bowls, once sun-baked and hard, now glisten wet. You stack them for inspection, ready for reuse in the afternoon meal. Next, you collect scraps of discarded yam and millet husks, food waste reserved for the palace pigs in the western pen. The pigs are tended by a separate cadre of servants who watch you approach from a distance. You toss the scraps beneath low-hanging beams, careful not to startle the animals. Their grunts harmonize oddly with the distant kora notes still floating through corridors. Once your bundle is emptied, you scrub your hands over a stone basin, using ash and water to neutralize lingering grease. With your morning chores done, you receive orders to fetch fresh water jugs for the Oba's private chambers. The walk takes you through corridors where every wall is carved with scenes of ancestral triumphs. You trace your fingertips over the reliefs, hunting parties, leopard hunts, sacred ceremonies before stepping into the outer courtyard. There, under an archway draped with palm fronds, for youth carry jars of spring water. One calls your name softly and passes a jar to you on a reed-woven tray. You bow, accept the weight of the jar, neck slender belly round, and lift it carefully. The cool clay feels soothing against your palm. Returning through the labyrinthine passage, you pass the Oba's door, where a pair of brass-clad guards stand silent. They nod. Your presence is as constant as the palace walls themselves. Inside, flickering lanterns reveal tapestries of coral and ivory spun into scenes of peaceful counsel between Orba and counselors. You place the water at a low shelf and retreat without looking up. No glance must ever betray the Obe's private rituals. Your final duty before a brief midday rest is to prepare the servant's own meal. In a small annex kitchen, you and two others slice onions and peppers over a low table. The sun now streams in through high windows, dust motes dancing in the pillars of light. You add palm oil and a handful of dried fish, simmering the stew until the broth smells like sea breeze and spice. You ladle the stew into rough earthen bowls and share the simple fare beneath a cloth canopy on the service terrace. Here, for a few moments, you glimpse one another's faces. Fatigue softened by companionship. No chanting accompanies this meal. Only the gulp and sigh of nourishment as you rest your paddle-scarred arms on your thighs. You wonder at the contrast between your humble repast and the arbor's sumptuous feast only hours earlier. Yet both depend on the same ingredients, the same spring water, and the same communal effort. You sip the broth, its heat waking possibilities of quick, dreamless slumber ahead. But before you close your eyes, you pause at the terrace's edge. The palace spires tipped in gold leaf gleam softly against a sky turning steel blue. Somewhere beyond these walls, the market's first calls rise. Sellers of cloth, ivory, spices. Though you remain within the palace's hush, you sense that life pulses outward in ceaseless motion. And you, a servant among many, stand at the quiet center of this intricate world. What must await you after this brief rest? Will the afternoon bring new challenges, serving foreign envoys, polishing brass lamps, assisting in sacred rites? And how do the smallest tasks you perform each day echo in the grand narrative of palace power? You've reached the maximum length for this conversation, but you can keep talking by starting a new chat. Retry Story 5, the daily life of a palace servant section till you left off, just as the dawn bells faded over the courtyard, and you, able lowliest of the palace footmen, had collapsed onto a dust-streaked bench, heart still pounding from hauling water for the morning ablution. Now, as the sun rises higher over Benin City's red-tilled roofs, the palace stirs into full activity by the time you wipe the last bead of sweat from your brow. The corridor outside the royal audience chamber is a teeming tide of servants, guards, clerks, and lesser wives, all jostling for their morning tasks. Your orders arrive from the groom of the robes, a squat, bespectacled man with an endless scroll tucked under one arm. He points you toward the storeroom beneath the southern stairwell, where several locked chests await inspection. Inside the cool, dim space, shafts of light slip through narrow windows to reveal stacks of folded textiles, cobalt-dyed wrappers, embroidered velvet cloaks, and rows of gleaming coral beads stored in clay jars. Your task is to inventory the Orba's ceremonial garments for tonight's hunting feast. An endless litany of tunics to count and count again, lest a prized sash go missing. You crouch before the lowest chest, prizing open its lid with a dozen tiny keys on a ring. Inside, a pile of leaf-patterned cloth glimmers faintly under your flickering lantern. You must refold each garment with near-whisper precision, no ruffled collars. Your fingertips, already raw from hauling water, now tingle from handling the coarse bark cloth. You tally sash after sash, gingerly placing them back in a neat stack. Your flickering lantern casting wind-blown shadows against the stone wall. As the morning deepens, the air in the storeroom grows musty and warm. Behind you, muffled footsteps signal the palace herbalist Iwoma arriving to retrieve yarrow leaves for the Orba's midday tonic. You step aside, lantern held high, watching her slender fingers braid stems into small bundles. She murmurs a brief apology, her eyes on the scarves around her waist, too busy for greetings. Duty overtakes charm here. Once the herbalist departs, you close and lock the chest. Roll your shoulders to ease the stiffness, and trudge back toward the central atrium. There, the scent of smoked fish and grilled goat drifts from the kitchen courtyard. You pause at the low stone wall, clamber up, and peer inside. A dozen cooks crouch over clay ovens, turning earthenware pots and stirring thick palm oil stews. Your next assignment is here. Fetch fine grains of crushed pepper from the spice cabinet and replenish the stew pot inside the kitchen's small annex. The spice cabinet glows orange under a single iron lantern. Wooden shelves hold clay pots, labeled in black ink, guava seeds, ground dawa, and the precious Benin peppercorns. Each jar opens with a soft inhale of pungent heat. You fill a coconut shell scoop, then return to the cooks, handing it off to a broad-shouldered woman whose arm is scarred from boiling oil. She barely nods before dumping the pepper into the stew, eliciting a faint hiss. That your midday break arrives before the Orba's midday sacrifice begins 20 minutes to sit against the cool red bricks of the West Tower. You tuck your stained wrapper beneath you and draw a deep breath of mango-scented breeze. A passing court musician, lute in hand, hums a low tune. For a moment, you almost forget your aching back. But the palace clock tolls twice, reminding you that rest is a fleeting privilege. It is back to the courtyard once more, this time to help set out the sacrificial bowls on low ivory tables near the Orba's raised dais. The bowls carved from palm nuts and lined with beaten gold leaf must stand in perfect rows, each filled with rice, yams, and goat's blood. You inch between the tables in single file, crouched low so as not to disturb the hierarchy etched in the seating plan. One wrong step, and a bowl could topple, an embarrassing error sure to earn a sharp rebuke from the master of ceremonies after the sacrifice. When the arbor reclines under his coral-beaded canopy, you return each emptied bowl to the kitchen courtyard. The cooks, now splattered with rice and blood, grin knowingly. You earned your morsel today, they tease, passing you a small plate of pounded yam and smoked fish. You eat standing, chewing slowly to savor the rare treat. Even this small kindness reminds you of why you endured the endless tasks in this palace. You may be footman and scullion, but the world outside the walls offers no such certainty. Just as you finish your meal, a palace herald appears, summoning you to the North Tower. The OBA requires an extra layer of fresh mats for visiting dignitaries tonight. Apparently, the governor from a distant province arrives after dusk. Your next duty awaits. Up narrow, spiraling stairs you climb, guided by the herald's flickering torchlight. Each step is carved from single oak trunks, worn smooth by centuries of traffic. At the top, a small balcony overlooks the city. You help carry several straw mats, lashed with leather strips, into the guest chamber. The walls here are cooler, painted with scenes of jaguars and eagles. You arrange the mats in orderly overlap, leaving precisely enough space for each guest to recline. As dusk gathers, you light a row of oil lamps, their amber glow dancing along the painted walls. You step back to admire your work, brushing stray straw fragments from your wrapper. Before you can relax, the trumpets sound. The governor's procession moves through the great gate. A rumble of footsteps and hooves echoes up the tower stairs. You descend with the herald, lantern in hand, moving toward the main courtyard where benches are being readied for the arrival. The smell of dusk flowers drifts on the humid air. The court musicians have assembled once more, tuning their drums and rattles. You find a space near the back, among the other junior servants, and watch as the torches in the courtyard flare to life. And now you stand, shoulders squared, as the chief eunuch raises his staff to announce the governor's approach. Each moment is a note in the palace symphony of protocol, a rehearsal you have practiced since childhood. Still, you wonder, will tonight's guest bring news of new trading routes, or whispers of drought in distant provinces? In the warm glow of dawn, you rise before most in the palace compound. The hallways are cool underfoot, polished stone, slick with the night's condensation, and the torches along the walls flicker as if reluctant to banish the shadows of yesterday's councils. You move quietly past the closed doors of the arbor's private chambers, knowing that your first duties center on preparing the palace for the day's ceremonies. Even as a lowly attendant, you take pride in your role. Without the perfect placement of stools, cushions, and carved stools for guests, no dignitary could be properly received. Your first task is in the inner vestibule, a narrow corridor lined with brass lanterns whose smoky glass diffuses the torchlight into an amber haze. You carry a simple wooden bucket of water drawn from the courtyard well last night. With a well-worn rag, you kneel before the ornate bronze plaques that depict the arbor's ancestors. Carefully, so as not to disturb the waxy protective coating, you wipe the faint dust from the sunken reliefs. Each figure carved into the brass seems to regard you in silent appraisal. The work is methodical. Dip rag in water, wring it out, circle around each plaque, buff gently. Set the bucket aside, and replace the rag onto the leather strap at your waist. Nearby, an older servant named Uella enters, her braided hair echoing centuries of palace tradition. She carries a small bundle of fresh banana leaves folded into tight squares. These she places at the base of the ancestral altaran, offering to honor the spirits of the departed kings. You learn from her nod that today's offering is approved, and you step back, shoulders squared, observing the precise fold of the leaves. The ritual is silent but essential. By midday, high-ranking courtiers will pass through this vestibule and place coins or native cola nuts atop the leaves in a gesture of piety that you know will be scrutinized by priests later. Your attention shifts to the preparation of fuel for the fireplaces in the great audience hall. You exit through the kitchen door into the palace courtyard, where rows of Castian cauldrons hang over hearths now cold. Two more servants stand guard over piles of firewood, split branches from Morocco and ebony trees, their ends dried and cracked. You help carry logs into the hall, balancing them on your hip as you step onto the raised threshold. The chief hearth keeper Chiton taps one log with her knuckles, listening for the hollow ring that tells her it is perfectly seasoned. She smiles and hands you the log. You place it carefully among the coals still glowing faintly from last night's fire, coaxing to life with dried grass and palm fronds. Soon the smoky warmth fills the hall, and the ministers arriving later will comment on the comforting heat in the corner. Behind a curtain of woven raffia stands the oboe's personal tea, an elaborate brass vessel still smudged from yesterday's brew. You lift the lid and peer inside. The tea leaves, imported by Portuguese traders, have turned a dull brown, and the fragrant vapor is faint. With a small ladle, you scoop water from the nearby ewer, pour it slowly over the leaves, and set the urn to warm gently over a low flame. The tea master, midwife to countless whispering debates on state policy, will arrive to judge its strength and adjust the infusion. For now, smells of burnt resin and tea drift through the room, promising a gentle stimulant for the arbor's morning deliberations. By mid-morning, the palace stirs. Shoes tap on stone. Murmured kumis speak of trade ambassadors from Lagos and canoe expeditions on the Niger. A brass bell rings twice, the code you learned at your first week in service, signaling that ministers will soon arrive for the day's council. You slip behind the curtain to refill the tea urn, pouring slowly from a height to aerate the brew. Drops scatter like pearls in the urn's belly. With a quick cloth wipe, you polish the urns outside, removing tiny fingerprints left by anxious attendants. In the antechamber, cloth-draped benches await the arriving dignitaries. You hasten to inspect each cushion, inlaid with cowrie shells. They bear the red and gold threads of the Aba's livery. One cushion is askew an imperfection that would earn you a reprimand if noticed by the ceremonial captains. You adjust it, smoothing out the folds so that the pattern of shell-worked circles aligns perfectly with the carved wooden frame beneath. You step back and twitch your tunic, self-conscious at the attention to detail. Soon, the OBA's heralds appear, hornblowers in feathered caps, carrying long ivory trumpets etched with designs of leopards. They will stand in the entrance, facing outwards, ready to announce the OBA's presence with sonorous blasts. You retreat to your corner, aware that the sudden call of the trumpet is your cue to fetch the OBA's staff, an ebony rod topped with a bronze head shaped like a crowned head of state. You grasp it with two hands, feeling the cool weight of polished wood under your palms. The bronze head bears the Orba's likeness, a reminder that no one else must touch the staff. The trumpets sound a low, sustained note that echoes through stone arches. You step forward, staff in hand, and bow your head as the great doors swing open. The Orba glides into the hall, robed in velvets of indigo and trimmed with dyed ostrich feathers. His attendants carry incense burners, trails of fragrant smoke curling above his presence. You keep your posture straight, balancing the staff, until a high-ranking minister motions for you to place it beside the throne. Only then do you exhale. The council begins, voices humming low like cicadas at dusk. You slip away to tend to the refreshment table, wooden platters of palm wine and cut leaf, calabashes and bowls of cassava fritters. The process is nearly identical. Each day, light the oil-filled lamps, arrange the carafes, ensure each bowl has its appropriate spoon carved from hippo ivory. The Minister of Finance will need samples. The foreign envoy may request a snack. You watch from the sideline, noticing how some attendees dip too eagerly, spilling drops of wine onto their cloth sachets. Marks that you will quietly blot out with a fresh scrap of cotton. Though no one speaks to you directly, servants are meant to blend into the background. You overhear fragments of discussion. Today it is about regulating the salt trade along the coast. Tomorrow it may concern the rhythm of rainy seasons and yam yields. You imagine yourself one of the ministers holding a cup of tepid tea, but you know the truth. Your life is in the margins, where order is upheld by unseen hands like yours. When the council breaks, you refill the water jars and collect the emptied bowls. You carry them down to the kitchen courtyard, where the cooks lean against adobe walls and wipe their brows. You set the bowls on a long bench. They will later be scrubbed by apprentices. As you turn to head back inside, a young maid accidentally collides with you, knocking the arbor's staff from its hidden perch. You catch it mid-fall, heart clattering like dropped coins, and glimpse a pair of graceful hands reaching to steady you. It belongs to Owella, the elder attendant who taught you this hole's rhythms. She raises an eyebrow but does not scold. Instead, she slips a supportive arm around your elbow, guiding you through the remainder of the courtyard. You realize that, beyond the ceremonial splendor, there is an unspoken camaraderie among the palace servants. Each day's ordeals, whether stoking fires to hot, polishing plaques by mistake, or nearly dropping the OBA staff, bind you together. And though your names are known to few, your shadows fall across the very engines of statecraft. Unseen but essential. As the sun reaches its zenith, you pause at the entryway to the lower halls. The midday bell rings, and once again, guests will arrive. Hunters returning with bushmeat, scribes with fresh didactic scrolls, and the Oba's personal physician bearing powders for another doctor's council. You turn to fetch more coals, more water, more tea, knowing that no 2 days are exactly alike, even if the tasks repeat in predictable order. Yet, there is one question that lingers in your mind as you crouch by the hearth. What happens when the palace gates finally close at night, and the council's echo fades into memory? You've reached the maximum length for this conversation. But you can keep talking by starting a new chat. Retrite the daily life of a palace servant. You open your eyes long before sunrise. Although eyes is generous, the lids feel pasted shut by harmattan dust and yesterday's kitchen smoke. The royal compound around you, stitched together from high laterite walls and reed-covered passageways, is still dark. No rooster has dared to crow. Even the iron gongs hanging near the courtyard gateways remain silent. Yet you, palace servant of the Oba of Benin, rise anyway, because sleep inside these walls is not quite as gifted as a favor that can be revoked with a whisper. Slipping from the mat, you roll your thin cotton wrapper tight and tuck it under one arm. It still smells faintly of the palm oil soap issued once a week by the palace quartermaster. That yesterday's bath in the servants' pool actually happened. You step onto the packed red earth floor, Under your toes, the ground is cool, almost damp, from the evening dew that settles on every surface not protected by palm thatch somewhere. Overhead bats quarrel softly before returning to the roof beams. The air tastes of clay and charcoal, but you know it will thicken into pepper smoke and brass melter fumes before the sun reaches its peak. Your first duty, every day without fail, is to greet the ancestral shrine of the royal household. The brass altar stands in a small alcove off the main courtyard, protected by a palm fiber curtain that rustles at the slightest touch. Only servants born within palace walls errand like you are permitted here at this hour. You kneel, sprinkle a pinch of kola nut dust onto the altar's smooth, cold surface, and whisper the same formula taught by the senior eunuchs. May the spirits of the Obas guard today's breath. The phrase is dull from repetition, yet it still quickens your pulse. A forgotten word, a stammery that could invite suspicion that you are careless before spirits and king alike. Better to sound wooden than clever. Nearby, another servant, Ikit, lights the first palm oil lamp of the day. Its glow flickers across the bronze commemorative head of a past Oba, the metal surface gleaming like river water at dusk. Every morning you catch yourself studying that face, its almond-shaped eyes. Tiny beadwork crowned, wondering whether the likeness is faithful or idealized. Did the real Oba breathe through a nose that straight, lips that calm? The sculpture never answers, of course, and you never ask aloud. Instead, you offer the wooden broom tucked behind the door its own silent greeting. It matters less whether spirits hear you than whether the elder eunuch Idahosa sees you obey tradition. Sweeping begins. Courtyard dust is relentless. Red clay, powder sifts from shoes, robes, even the hides of goats led through on errands you never quite understand. You push the broom in slow, rhythmic arcs, tracing semicircles that overlap like fish scales. The pattern was taught by your mother herself, a palace cloth washer before fever caught her lungs on. She insisted it keeps the earth tightly packed. Whether true or not, the pattern soothes your thoughts. With each sweep your breathing finds a quiet tempo, and the courtyard transforms from a place of potential scolding into one you temporarily control. By the time the eastern sky fades from indigo to copper, echoes stir along the corridor. Gourd rattles and barcloth footfalls announce the arrival of the kitchen. Crew carrying baskets of dried smoked catfish and yam flour. These pass through in a blur of urgency. Breakfast for 300 mouths does not cook itself. You and Ikit finish sweeping and trot to the storeroom. There, stacks of earthen pots wait, some for palm soup, others for thick ogi porridge. You check each vessel's rim for cracks, because a chipped pot that breaks mid-morning could delay the Aba's first meal, and delayed meals turn swiftly into punishments. Moments later you hurry to join the waterline. Servants form a column. At the well, each cradling 2 brass-ringed calabashes. Conversation is hushed. Practical: how many measures of water were used yesterday, whether the leather bucket rope will hold, which herbal mixture might soothe a scald from boiling oil. Yet beneath the mundane questions you sense a unifying vigilance. Everyone fears committing the error that will draw the ire of the Eis, the senior court official whose cane leaves no visible mark yet steals weeks of wages. Or you count silently. 1 gourd filled, 2 gourds filled. A nod to the guard who checks for excess spillage. As first light floods the compound, the air changes. A breeze carries the sharp scent of charcoal from the metal workers' quarter. The foundry fires, banked overnight, are coaxed back to life with bellows. You can almost feel the heat licking at damp clay molds, hear the twang of iron tongs as an apprentice lifts a crucible of molten brass. Those workers occupy a higher rung than common servants, still beneath titled chiefs, yet above sweepers like you. Their skill sustains the kingdom's reputation. Every plaque destined for an altar begins in those fires. You wonder if any of them envy your proximity to the Arbor's living quarters, or if they pity you for the same. Breakfast service begins at sunrise proper. You carry trays of steaming ogi balanced on padded cloth rings atop your head. The path from kitchen to royal veranda is both short and treacherous. Stray dogs lurk for scraps, and narrow drainage grooves threaten to catch a sandal strap. Arrival at the veranda requires a bow, eyes lowered, tray held chest high until an attending eunuch signals. Only then may you place bowls on the low table carved with entwined mudfish, symbol of the king's dual earthly and spiritual power. The Oba himself seldom appears this early, yet the possibility hums in every heartbeat. Once service ends, cleanup begins, and the day settles into its long, predictable rhythm. Polishing brass armlets, airing ceremonial coral beads, folding wrappers. For court messengers, tasks blur until midday drums call the compound to pause. You steal a moment beneath a neem tree's sparse branches, sharing salted melon seeds with Eek. She tells you rumors of Portuguese traders seeking more ivory tusks, which might mean extra work for the ivory carvers and perhaps a stray coin or two for servants who haul the heavy raw tusks. You listen, but your gaze drifts to the foundry. Roofware smoke spirals lazy against the sky after rest. You join the afternoon procession of water bearers bound for the Queen Mother's quarters. The Ioba rarely speaks to servants, but her eyes miss nothing. Under their weight, You feel freshly aware of your posture, the tilt of your calabash, the state of your sandals. Delivering the water without a ripple becomes its own meditation. As you retreat down the corridor, you again pass the foundry doorway. The clang of metal on metal startles a flock of finches from the rafters. For a moment you imagine life behind those doors, the glow of crucibles, the secret of lost wax casting, the moment molten alloy meets hidden clay and becomes something that might outlast generations. Evening approaches. Shadows lengthen. The compound's red walls turn blood brown, then almost violet. You sweep the courtyard a second time. Slower now, muscles aching, the palm oil lamps are relit, and the bronze ancestral head catches firelight in its patient eyes. You pause, broom mid-lark, struck by a question you are never supposed to dwell on when today's OBA eventually passes. Who among the artisans will cast his commemorative head, and whose hands will polish it each dawn? Will it be a Keats yours? Or will another generation of servants, not yet born, step into the unending rhythm of greeting, sweeping, serving, and bowing? The thought lingers as a bat darts overhead, squeaking like a needle slipping off an ivory comb. The courtyard returns to its dim, orderly silence. But the question refuses to fade. In a palace where every role seems fixed, where does change actually begin? You wake long before even the dust-colored dawn dares creep across the courtyards of Benin City's palace. There is no mattress beneath you, only a tightly woven raffia mat that smells faintly of palm oil, smoke, and the perspiration of a dozen earlier sleepers. Still, you rise at the first touch of cool air on your cheeks. If you are late, someone else will seize the best broom, the cleanest bucket, the choicest chore, best and choice being relative words in the vocabulary of a palace servant. A low drum beat, 3 leisurely heartbeats up it echoes down the earthen corridor. It is struck not for ceremony but for order. The senior eunuch reminding every underling that the Oba's household does not sleep past the stars. You are one of perhaps 200 servants who keep these courtyards swept, the brass polished, and the stews forever simmering. Your first task is water. The palace well sits near the bronze melter's quarter, its rope permanently fraying despite constant splicing. You shoulder a calabash ladle and 2 clay jars still damp from yesterday's rinse moonlight prize between the thatch eaves as you move. Stone gargoyles, half leopard, half-human glint above doorway lintels, their eyes exaggerated by brass inlay. In the flicker of a guttering torch they appear to scowl, though in truth they are only guardians sculpted by the Oba's ancestors. 2 frightened thieves and, perhaps, lazy servants start at the well. You join a queue of silhouettes. Nobody speaks beyond a whispered proverb or a snort of fatigue. Clay jars thunk the deck planks in a rhythm steadier than any court musician's drum. Water splashes, and already your bare feet are gritty from spilt sand. You inhale, taste the iron in the breeze, and wonder how many dawns remain before your muscles forget what it was like to be rested. When your turn comes, you haul the bucket slowly. The rope's leather knots burn your palm. Beneath you, the well echoes like an ancient throat, complaining with each swing of the wooden pulley. The water is faintly bitter. Every servant knows the flavor, but it is cooler than the air and, mercifully, plentiful. With jars filled, you return past workshops that will soon ring with metal on metal, through a goat pen where the animals are still asleep, and into a kitchen yard so large it could host a wrestling match. The chief cook, Mama Ini, is already awake. She stands before a mound of yam tubers and tilts her chin toward an overturned mortar. You understand her order without words. Peel, pound, and do not daydream. So it begins the long hour before true sunrise, an hour devoted to preparation, rather than performance. You peel yams by lantern light. The papery skins drop in quiet spirals to the ground. As you work, you recite, silently, the palace hierarchy. Oba first, obviously, then the Queen Mother, then titled chiefs, then the royal wives, ranked by favor, then the guild heads, then, far beneath, the servants and slaves, and below, even them, the goats you just tiptoed past. For goats at least have the privilege of becoming part of the Oba's feast. It is a mental catechism drilled into you by the whip and the promise of small privileges. Somewhere near the middle is a place you will never reach, but the exercise helps pass time. By the moment the eastern sky blushes from charcoal to bruised violet, the kitchen yard hums. Younger boys pump the bellows under 3 clay stoves. Sparks, snap like tiny musket shots. Palm oil smoke weaves with steam from the yam mortar. The smell of onions, coarse potent, makes your eyes sting more than the smoke. Mama Ini ladles palm nut soup into a bronze pot so polished you can find your own weary face in its curved side. She catches your reflection, grunts approval without a word, and you feel the small warmth of recognition. One day she might request you personally for important cooking, perhaps during the Igu festival. Until then, you keep chopping. Breakfast for the Oba must reach the royal apartments precisely when the talking drums announce sunrise. The meal is not a plantain, a thin maize pap cow milk curd, birthed from the palace's own herd, but timing is more sacred than flavor. If the OBA enters the audience court with an empty stomach, the entire palace quivers. You help arrange trays, polish brass dishes lined with freshly woven banana leaves. A fellow servant, Ago, nudges you and points with his chin across the yard. Two brass workers hurry by, faces slick with sweat despite the cool dawn. They carry a heavy mold between them, sealed with river clay. Even at this hour they rush, for the royal foundries cannot pause. Somewhere today a new commemorative plaque will be cast, perhaps showing the Orba flanked by attendants, much like you, only frozen in bronze immortality while you remain firmly in flesh and fatigue. With trays balanced on your forearms, you follow Mama Ini through echoing corridors. Your footsteps are muffled by mats of raffia. Drums somewhere in the distance shift into a busier rhythm. In the courtyards, royal messengers sweep yesterday's leaves into orderly piles. The air smells of camwood and hot iron. You pass beneath an arch carved with Portuguese faces, long mustaches, wide-brimmed hats, reminders of old trade ties. The figures leer quietly at you. You keep eyes down. At the final doorway, Mama Ini halts. Only her most trusted enter the Oba's private wing. She nods once, and you remain outside, arms aching gently with weight you no longer hold. A junior eunuch relieves you of the trays and disappears behind beaded curtains. You exhale. Task 1 complete before sunrise. 12 hours remain until rest. You return to the service quarters. Now begins the cleaning, an endless waltz of broom, rag, and coplish. You join 3 others in a corridor lined with wooden plaques depicting past battles. Brass studs dot the panels like constellations. Your job: wipe each stud with a cloth dipped in lemon ash to keep the sheen bright. The studs are cold beneath your fingers, and you wonder if the heroes leveraged into this old timber imagined servants centuries later would polish their bravery. Mid-morning heat swells. Sunshine finally spills past courtyards and climbs the colonnades. You pause at a doorway to drink from a gourd. The water is warm now, touched by the sun, but you swallow gratefully. As you sip, you watch a procession pass. Ivory trumpeters, coral-beaded chiefs, the Oba himself, borne on a litter. The column flows like a living tapestry toward the great court, where petitions will scamper like mice around the king's throne. You remain at your post, cloth in hand. Invisibility is protection, yet a slice of pride sneaks in. The gleam on each brass stud might reflect into a chief's eye today, causing him to blink. That blink, that second of surprise, is your anonymous signature. Just before the sun peaks, a bell calls servants to the shade of the south wall for a quick meal. Maize porridge with smoked fish flakes. You claim a wooden bowl and sit beside Ago, he mutters. Gossip, a new European trader waiting at the river gate. Rumors of cloth dyed in colors unseen. Whispers of iron cannon. You focus on porridge. Gossip can lift or doom a servant, depending on which ear overhears. Afternoon duties. Shift to laundry. Under an awning, you beat linen tunics against a ridged board. Each slap a memory of the river you rarely see. Soap here is made from palm kernel ash and smells faintly sweet. Your arms ache, but rhythm soothes. Across the yard, sculptors chip at a block of seasoned wood, a future door panel. They talk softly about whether to carve a leopard or a two creatures sacred to the Arba's power. The conversation is philosophical, drifting like incense. Which beast's best guards a threshold? Which symbol warns better in silence? Their debate reminds you that even artisans spare thoughts for meaning, whereas servants mainly spare thoughts for tomorrow's chores when laundry hangs. You are sent to the royal storeroom, a labyrinth of clay jars, bronze bowls, and woven baskets stacked to the rafters. Dust motes dance in stray beams of light. The air is cool like the inside of a gourd. Your task: count salt blocks arrived from the north. Salt is royal revenue, precious as brass and easier to trade. You note each chalk-white brick, stacking them by size. The work is bland but peaceful. Numbers never scold. Still, a question tickles your mind. How far did these blocks travel across sands, where camels sink knee-deep, through markets where another servant counted them under a different sun? You will never know, yet the salt sits in your hands now, waiting for the Orba's treasurer. Late afternoon, clouds roll in heavy as malice. Rain drums the thatch. You help push water off the courtyard through stone runnels. Mud spatters calves. The air smells electric and clean. Thunder cracks. Somewhere a goat curses the sky. The sudden cool is a gift, but the courtyard floods quickly. You pile split firewood onto a higher ledge and wonder if tomorrow's breakfast will carry the taste of damp smoke. By sunset, the rain quits. Timidity steams from walls, turning the palace into a slow-breathing animal. Torches relight, moths jitter in orange halos. Evening meal for servants is yam pottage flavored with garden greens. You sit cross-legged, bowl balanced on knees, gaze flicking toward the western sky gone iron blue. Bells chime. The Orba is at evening prayers before his ancestor altars. You picture brass bells ringing beside carved ivory tusks, flames reflecting on coral beads. That private ritual, audible but unseen, marks the closing bracket of your day. Night chores remain. Mop the audience hall. Damp wipe bronze plaques so tomorrow's dust will find less purchase. Chase stray chickens from corridors. As you work, you hum the tune of the morning drum. slower now, almost lullaby. A thin candle guttering nearby casts shapes onto the wall. For a moment the shadow looks like you holding a scepter instead of a broom. You laugh under your breath quietly, so as not to wake authority and shake the vision away. Just before midnight, you roll your mat beside others in the servants' dormitory. The smell of smoke and bodies is thick, but exhaustion is thicker. You stretch out, muscles buzzing with small aches, heartbeat steady like a talking drum muted by cloth. Outside, you hear the foundry's low roar. Even at this hour the wax melts, bronze flows, artisans breathe fumes, so tomorrow a plaque may cool by dawn. Somewhere a singer croons a soft praise song to the orbit voice, threading through the night like a spider's silk dot. As eyelids sink, you wonder one last question. Will tomorrow be different? Will a steward notice your polished studs and assign you kitchen duty for the Egu festival? Will salt blocks disappear under someone's greedy cloak? Will a new door guardian reveal a mudfish or a leopard? Sleep steals the inquiry. The palace exhales, and you, one servant among hundreds, drift into dreams shaped like corridors lined with brass. From desert pans to humid forest edge you stand. Just beyond the city gate of Benin, toes pressing into damp red earth. The air is thick with humidity, and somewhere in the distance a bell calls a messenger to the Ober's palace. You might imagine salt as a mere kitchening on stews and cured meats, but here, in the late 16th century, salt is wealth in crystalline form. It arrives from the north, across dusty Saharan salt pans and winding savanna tracks. Carried by caravans of camels and canoes in equal measure, your day begins before dawn, as it does for countless others whose livelihood depends on this glimmering white mineral. The OBA has decreed that all salt entering the kingdom must pass through royal hands, a monopoly that underpins court revenues, funds military expeditions, and underwrites grand ceremonies. As you step into the courtyard, you join a line of porters, saddle boys, and canoe handlers, each assigned a portion of the burden. You carry not only grain baskets or firewood, but the very lifeblood of trade itself. The caravan's long journey. Imagine the caravan's first stretch, miles of cracked pans shimmering under the Sahara sun. Salt slabs, cut by Tuareg laborers with wooden chisels, rest atop camel saddles. Each slab weighs nearly as much as an adult man, and dozens clink together in tight leather netting. Camels walk in solemn procession, padded feet silent on bleached clay. You feel the weight of imperial ambition in each step. These slabs will become coins in Benin's economy. At trading oases in Agadez and Kana, North African merchants exchange salt for kola nuts, cloth, and brass rods. You can picture their tents, goats tethered nearby, purses heavy with cowrie shells, the rattle of beads echoing under palm fronds. In Kano's market, large barrels of salt are measured out by long-handled ladles, the fine dust coating every surface. Merchants haggle, faces lit by dawn's first glow, voices low and persistent. Inland routes. From Kano to the Niger. From Kano, caravans branch south. You join one group at the Niger's Great Bend, where seasoned boatmen wait in dugout canoes. It's the rainy season, and the river has risen to swallow its banks. Reed huts have doorways half submerged. Fishermen pole through waist-deep water. You load slabs of salt alongside bundles of smoked fish and gourds of palm oil. The village headman demands tribute, a handful of cowrie shells per canoe put in the OBA's name as you drift downstream. The forest canopy closes overhead. Light filters through dense leaves, and the sharp scent of wet earth mingles with the river's musk. You glimpse aquatic birds, herons, ibises wading in shallow pools. You imagine the salt dissolving into every stream, enriching soils and bodies alike. No grain grows without it. No wound heals without it. Toll stations and royal levies. Eventually you disembark at a raised wooden dock just outside Benin's walls. Here royal agents stand ready with bamboo poles and notched rods. Each canoe's load is examined, salt slabs are counted, and a portion, perhaps a sixth, is set aside as toll. You watch as porters carry these slabs up a ramp into the Oba treasury compound, where they'll be stored in earthenware jars. You learn that the Oba's salt tax is not uniform. Coastal ports pay a lower levy, 12 shells per slab, while the deep forest routes incur as many as 18. The discrepancy reflects political favor. Coastal governors have sway in the palace, while forest chiefs are older allies, granted lighter duties to maintain loyalty. You feel the tension in each balanced scale. The flick of bamboo as agents confirm weights. Salt as currency and medicine. Back in town, you see salt traded in small town markets. Women weigh pinches of salt against bronze weights shaped like birds or fish. Salt is exchanged for yams, for small leather pouches of peppercorns, and even for cloth scraps dyed indigo, which a symbol of status and ritual. A healer stoops by your side, mixing salt with bitter roots to fashion a paste for infected wounds. You realize salt's importance is not merely economic, it is medicinal and metaphysical. That evening, the Abbas chamber is lit by an array of brass lamps. Courtiers gathered for the midnight council. They discuss tribute from vassal towns, what salt has arrived, how many canoes have docked, what new routes might open during the next dry season. The Abbas strokes his chest in satisfaction. Salt revenues have funded a new city wall, allowed the commissioning of brass plaques, and underwritten the purchase of imported coral beads for the royal regalia. Unseen hands behind the trade you catch, the sight of a young clerk, seated at a low table, chiseling numbers into a wooden tally board. His ink brush hovers over a roll of parchment. Treports will be sent to continental traders in Lagos as far as Lisbon. Though he works by flickering lamp, you sense his mind is already drifting. Will the next caravan bring enough to satisfy court expenses, or will drought and banditry shrink the loads? As you walk home under a moonless sky, you consider the network that spans desert, savanna, river, and rainforest. It is a living chain of human endeavor, from salt gatherers scraping pans and stifling heat, to canoeists navigating shifting channels, to royal agents meticulously accounting every slab. This economy measured in grains of salt supports an empire's pomp and the humble healers savor-like. But questions remain unspoken among the porters and courtiers. How secure are these routes when drought presses northward? Who controls the hidden forest paths beyond the Niger's bend? And when the caravan leaders shift allegiance, what becomes of the Oba's salt monopoly and of your own place in this intricate tapestry? Imagine yourself standing on the sandy banks of the river Niger at dawn, the air heavy with humidity and the distant sound of trading canoes sliding against the shore. In the late 15th and early 16th centuries, the kingdom of Benin, inland from the Gulf of Guinea, depended on a commodity more precious to its people than gold: salt. You might not think salt is exciting. It's colorless, weightless, and dissolves into water without a trace. But for the Edo people living under the Obo's reign, salt was a lifeline. It preserved fish, seasoned yams, and served as a form of currency when copper and cloth were scarce. Across the dusty savanna to the north lay the great salt pans of Tagaza and Bilma, where Tuareg caravans harvested crystalline salt blocks and loaded them onto camel caravels bound southward. These caravans traversed nearly 2,000 kilometers of semi-arid plains, navigating shifting dunes and waterways that appeared only during the rainy season. Along the way, they paused at oasis-simple wells lined with stoneware. Local Hausa and Kanuri middlemen traded millet, kola nuts, and smoked fish. By the time those salt blocks reached a small trade post at Igbang or Ugbin near Benin City, they had changed hands at least 3 times, each trader adding a markup that would ultimately fatten the Oba's coffers. For the Oba, salt was more than just a spice. It subsidized armies, funded palace ceremonies, and paid tribute to provincial chiefs. Palace scribes recorded every barrel of salt that passed through Benin's city gates. In neat rows of kola nut husking on parchment made from pounded bark, they logged the trader's name, the number of salt cakes, and the duty assessed of in as much as 1/10 of the entire load. These records were kept in wooden chests, bound with iron bands, accessible only to high priests and the IIS prime minister. The average commoner never glimpsed these tallies, but they felt the effects: higher taxes on palm oil, longer corvée labor demands during the planting season, and occasional rationing of salt for village use. Daily life in Edo villages revolved around the judicious use of salt. A family of 5 might receive a single palm-sized salt cake each month, pounded into fine granules and sprinkled sparingly over dried fish. Mothers taught their children the value of tasteless water, cooking cassava in pure river water to stretch meals when salt ran low. In the royal kitchens, however, vast mortar of salted beef and goat meat were prepared for the Arba's feasts. These extravaganzas displayed the kingdom's prosperity. Dozens of roasted animals, jugs of palm wine, and rows of decorated earthenware bowls filled with spiced soups. Guests from distant provinces and Portuguese merchants alike were invited to partake, proving that Benin reigned over a network more lucrative than any single European port. Portuguese traders who first arrived on the coast in the early 1480s quickly learned that salt procured cheaply from their own salt pans in the Algarve could be swapped for Benin's ivory, pepper, and later, the famed bronze works. Yet the OBA imposed strict regulations. Any foreign vessel landing without the OBA's consent risked confiscation of cargo and enslavement of crew. Salt shipments bound for the coast had to pass through royal warehouses at Uroa. Guards counted and recounted every stone. This centralized system ensured that the OBA captured a substantial share of commerce, while also preventing local chiefs from profiting too greatly. At the heart of this system lay the mysterious salt ward, a shaded courtyard flanked by cypress pillars carved with ancestral faces. Traders were seated on woven mats. Their tally sticks were collected and compared against palace records. Eunuchs, wearing white cloths to signify their purity, kept strict watch. They measured salt cakes against bronze weights, their precision so exact that disputes were rare. Yet rumors circulated among traders that some eunuchs dipped their fingers in mint juice to sweeten small lumps before weighing, or that favored merchants slipped gold dust into their palms to secure larger shares. Whether truth or gossip, these stories hinted at the human frailties beneath the palace's orderly facade. As the sun sank below the red clay walls of Benin City, you might ponder how a humble white crystal shaped the destiny of thousands. Did The Arbor's reliance on salt revenue make him more powerful, or did it sow seeds of unrest among a populace taxed beyond its means? In the next section, we will follow the journey of a single salt trader Ajusoihu's voyage from Tagaza to Benin City would reveal the hidden tensions beneath the polished bronze gates of the palace. You settle back into the shade of a baobab tree as dawn's first light brushes the horizon, and imagine the figure of Ojisoeti rising from his reed mat at the caravan's makeshift camp. Ethi, a middle-aged trader of Kanuri descent, has already ordered his apprentices to stoke the charcoal fires for brewing tea from hibiscus petals and crushed ginger. He pours the hot infusion into carved wooden cups, adding a handful of coarse salt harvested from his most recent stop at Agadas. His face, lined by years of desert sun and wind, betrays both pride and weariness. The journey from Tagaza to Benin City is nearing its end, yet remains fraught with peril and uncertainty. For his part, Ehi will see only 380 loads dispatched to his buyer at the coastal port of Beninansi. The remaining 20 have been claimed by the palace as compensation for administrative losses. When profits are tallied later, those missing loads will vanish into palace stores. Such is the nature of trade in Benin. Murky margins that reward those at the center of power and quietly punish those on the periphery. The caravan's homecoming, the journey home from the palace, is fraught with a different tension. Rather than the steady pace of camels bearing salt, Ehi's return party shoulders lighter loads of cowrie shells, glass beads, and elephant tusks, goods acquired through inland barter for his diminished salt cargo. As they pass through districts of the city, the distant drumbeats of evening ceremonies underscore the sense that life goes on, even as the economic machinery grinds away at small traders outside the city gates. Ehi sends word ahead to the trading post at Ugban requesting that his remaining provisions, dried fish, cowpeas, and fermented palm wine, be dispatched to his village of Bilma. The porters who will carry these goods know only that their master must attend to affairs in the capital, a place of both promise and peril. 2 villagers back home, Ehi's success or failure will be measured in salt rations and the price of millet for the coming planting season by the time the caravan reaches the first oasis. 5 days later, the lessons of the Benin salt market weigh heavily on Ehi's mind. He watches as apprentices crush the last of the salt blocks between stone pestles, grinding them into fine granules bound for domestic sale. Mothers in nearby encampments queue to purchase a handful for cooking, each woman coaxing her ration from the trader's open palm. Few realize the hidden cost, the palace's share, the informal fees, the loads seized for shrinkage. For many, salt no longer tastes like preservation. It tastes of subjugation. Ripples through village life when Eti finally returns to Bilma. A week later, he is greeted by a small crowd of anxious families. Under a mesquite tree outside the village palisade, he spreads out his remaining salt, enough for a month's supply of the customary ration. Village elders stare, their faces etched with fatigue and indignation. 3 cowries per cake, demands Obaya Sozu, the oldest trader in the settlement. The last caravan paid to. Why does Benin's Oba levy so heavily now? Effie explains. The palace's new policy, an official duty rate, a reduced demand for gifts, and a note on the 35 cowries he expended bribing scribes. His calculations are meticulous, the numbers laid bare for all to see. Yet understanding does not dissolve frustration. Women with infants complain that they must stretch their rations thinner than ever. Cassava gruels now nearly flat. Hunters lament that without salt, smoked game will spoil on long treks. Behind these grievances lies a larger tension. The balance between centralized authority and local subsistence. The OBA's revenue from salt underwrites the city's defenses and the grandeur of palace festivals, but it also drains the lifeblood of outlying communities. Tribal chiefs, once content to accept tribute in kind, now eye the caravan's departing camels with envy, jealous of the profits funneled into the Oba's coffers rather than shared among the provinces. A letter to the Ayosalate that night. By the light of a single oil lamp, Ehi uncurls a rolled parchment and begins to write. His letter is addressed to the Eis, the prime minister who oversees the kingdom's intricate bureaucracy. In formal Edo script, he recounts the journey's challenges, the raids near Zamfara, the inflated levies at Zaria, and the burden of administrative losses at the salt ward. He makes a modest request that next season, the duty be standardized at 2 cowries per cake, and that a transparent process be introduced for measuring shrinkage. Eki seals the letter with beeswax and the imprint of his personal sigilla, small camel framed by 2 salt cakes. As he ties it with raffia thread, he feels a mix of hope and doubt. Will the Eis ensconced behind palace walls read the ink-spotted plea, or will it join the countless petitions that languish in the royal archives, never seeing the light of day? The subtle seeds of discontent across the kingdom. Other traders make similar pleas. Over months, rumors swirl of delegations sent to Benin City, envoys from Orhionwin, Udo, and Ikepoma Waj demanding fairer treatment. The Oba's court responds with caution. A temporary suspension of certain duties here, a minor review there. Yet no wholesale reforms are implemented. The palace cannot afford to relinquish substantial salt revenue. Its armies must remain funded, its ceremonies unbroken, and its image unassailable. Back in the capital, eunuchs continue their careful tallies. New ivory gates sparkle in the assembly courtyard. Bronze casters produce ever more intricate plaques depicting the Arba's deeds. Salt, meanwhile, flows in constant supply. A flood of white crystals that promise preservation but deliver uncertainty. The broader impact on Benin's economy. The decades that follow Ihi's journey, salt revenue becomes an even more entrenched pillar of the kingdom's finances. Palace scribes refine their procedures, issuing numbered tokens to merchants and employing additional eunuch overseers. Provincial chiefs, hungry for favor, imitate Benin's system on a smaller scale, levying strict duties on palm oil and yams. Within their jurisdictions, the model of centralized taxation, measured in small, hard commodities, spreads across West Africa, influencing nascent tax systems in Dahomey Oyo and beyond. Yet, for ordinary people, salt grows scarcer. Grain producers suffer, unable to salt meats for transport. Fishermen on the Niger must cure each catch swiftly or see it spoil. In time, this scarcity fuels small revolts. Secret gatherings in the bush where villagers plot to ambush caravans, steal salt cakes, and redistribute them among their kin. These acts of defiance are minor, quickly quelled by nearest chieftains. Still, they signal a widening chasm between palace and province. Reflections on power and commodity control as you drift toward the end of this narrative. Consider how a simple mineral shaped not just one kingdom, but the dynamics of power, loyalty, and resistance across an entire region. Salt was never merely a seasoning, it was a tool of governance, a lever of influence, and a spark for dissent. Traders like Ogisor Eti navigated a labyrinth of official duties, personal gifts, and informal levies, all under the watchful gaze of palace eunuchs whose ivory weights bore silent testimony to the OBA's authority. In the modern world, we see echoes of this story whenever a government controls a vital commodity, oil, water, or rare earth minerals, and wields that control to consolidate power. The tension between central authorities' need for revenue and local communities' demand for fairness is as ancient as the salt routes themselves. Every time we turn on a tap, fill a tank, or trade in a global market, we participate in systems that, like Benin's salt trade, can both sustain life and stir unrest. So you might ask yourself, what invisible imbalances underlie today's supply chains? How often do small traders, farmers, truck drivers, dock workers shoulder the burdens of hidden fees and unofficial levies so that distant elites may thrive? And, most crucially, when does the pursuit of stability slip into the politics of scarcity, prompting communities to rebel against the very institutions that claim to protect them? With these questions lingering in your mind, the story of salt routes and the king's revenue draws to a close, leaving you to ponder the subtle forces that shape history, one grain at a time. Close your eyes and imagine standing at the edge of the Niger Delta just before sunrise, the air thick with the scent of brackish water and palm fronds. You hear the distant creak of canoes, long, slender hulls carved from single Iroko tree trunks pushing through the shallow waters toward the open sea. These aren't Benin's royal war canoes, however, but the modest trading vessels of the city-states and riverine communities that ring Benin's southern borders. In the late 15th century, merchants from Ijebu and Warri prepared to voyage westward along the coast, seeking the glittering sails of Portuguese caravels anchored offshore. These local captains, Ajibu Abisu Nupe Ayatia and its Ofadel, were neither kings nor warriors, but their journeys would forever alter West Africa's trade networks. Each carried distinct cargoes: kola nuts from the southern savannas, palm oil pressed from apiaceae fruits, and intricately patterned cotton cloth woven in inland workshops. They also bore diplomatic messages, gifts, and letters for the Obi of Benin, who hoped to strengthen his kingdom's hold on emerging European trade. Preparing for the coastal voyage in Ujo, a town of wooden stilt houses threaded by narrow canals, Obisesu supervised final preparations. His crew of 20 paddlers cleaned and oiled the canoe's hull with palm wine residue to reduce drag. They laced new raffia ropes through holes drilled along the gunwale, tested the balance of bamboo-reed sails, and polished their brass divination bowls, a nod to seeking the sea god Olokin's blessing. Late one evening, as fetid tidewater slithered past, Obiseju's wife offered kola nuts and palm wine libations on the riverbank. A diviner traced patterns in ground kola dust. If the grains clustered toward the west, the voyage would prosper. If they scattered, misfortune loomed. That night, Obisesu dreamt of albatross-like birds rare along this coast, promising safe passage. Following the monsoon winds with the dawn's rising tide, the canoe curved into the channel leading to open waters. Obisesu timed his departure to coincide with the southwest monsoon, a seasonal wind shifting around June that propelled canoes westward along the Bight of Benin. He and his paddlers, muscular men who ate yams enriched with palm oil for the sail taut and hoisted a small wooden bell as a lookout. Sharp-eyed boys perched at the prow, scanning for sandbanks, floating logs, and early signs of Portuguese sails. Their course hugged the coastline, passing fishing villages that flickered with campfire smoke each evening. The fishermen traded fresh smoked fish and waterfowl from maize and cowrie shells, currency that would later fund their own pilgrimages to trade hubs. Villagers pointed to rocky inlets where massive sea turtles nested, and the crew noted sandbars that shifted with each tide. Unlike the single-minded war canoes of Benin's navy, these merchant canoes navigated by combining crew wisdom, coastal landmarks, and the rhythmic beating of talking drums to convey messages across the decks. The first glimpses of European sails after 5 days at sea, the crew spotted triangular white sails on the horizon, far larger than any local craft. Heartbeats quickened as the silhouette crystallized into 2 Portuguese caravels, the São Jorge and the Nossa Senhora da Graça Anca, just beyond the breakers. Portuguese captains, dressed in pale woolen doublets and russet leather boots, peered through spyglasses from the forecastle. Their vessels bristled with iron cannon, and their reinforced hulls creaked as they rode the swells. Obissasu signaled his approach by lowering the sail and paddling the final league under oar power. Alone, the crew coated themselves in camwood powder to mask human scent from sharks and old riverine. Precaution though, sharks rarely ventured this close. As they drew within hailing distance, the Portuguese sent a longboat to meet them. Painted with flaming crosses, it carried for sailors led by Matias Fernandes, whose reputation as a fair trader traveled faster than his caravel. First contacts and early trades once aboard the longboat, Obissasu presented a red-dyed cloth and a carved ivory comb, a customary gift to open negotiations. Fernandes extended a hand and accepted the gifts with exaggerated courtesy, aware that such rituals cemented alliances as surely as written treaties. The longboat bounced across the swells toward the caravels, where Obissaju's goods were weighed on brass scales. He watched the Portuguese inspect cola nuts, turning them over against light to detect imperfections. Palm oil was spooned into glass vials, sealed with beeswax, and marked with Portuguese initials. In exchange, Obissasu received Venetian glass, beadsteiny polychrome spheres that chinked like laughter, and copper bracelets stamped with royal emblems. He also obtained small iron hinges and nails, tools that would later be prized by Benin's blacksmiths for palace door construction. The price for these imports was steep: 2 cowrie strings per handful of beads, 1 pot of palm oil per pendant. Yet Obissasu considered the exchange fair, for these goods would fetch premium prices once he delivered them inland to Ida and Osha, trading posts under Benin's sphere of influence. Diplomacy beyond commerce but trade was only part of the mission. Obissasu carried a letter sewn into a leather pouch from the Oba of Benin, Oba Izgi. The letter praised the Portuguese for their craftsmanship and invited Fernandes to send emissaries to Benin City's capital. It offered hospitality, a share in ivory profits, and assurances of safe conduct. The idea was to formalize contact, anchoring Portugal within existing regional power structures rather than relying solely on coastal forts. At São Tomé or Eomina, Obissasu also bore a leather pouch filled with cola dust infused with aromatic palm resin. He sprinkled a few grains beneath the longboat's keel, a ritual meant to bind the Portuguese to their promise of benign trade. Fernandes, unfamiliar with local superstition, observed with amused curiosity, yet allowed the ritual, sensing that cooperation would yield mutual benefits. Storm clouds and uncertain seas as Obissasu prepared to depart. Word reached him of an approaching storm front. The sky darkened, thunder rumbled like distant drums, and rollers began to swell. Merchant canoes, lacking heavy ballast, were vulnerable in such tempests. Local crews learned to reef their sails early, lash every loose item, and beach their craft if the surf turned lethal. Obissasu huddled with his paddlers in the longboat, sharing dried fish and boiled plantains as they awaited the storm's chatter. They discussed the astonishing sight of Portuguese cannon and mused on what such firepower might mean for future voyages. That night, wind and rain battered the caravels and canoes alike. Lanterns on deck swung violently. Obissaju's men sat huddled, reciting protective verses to Olacon and shouting warnings when waves broke over the gunwale. In the morning's grey light, the storm had abated but left behind a field of flotsam, broken masts, torn textile scraps, and a detached plank that must have come from one of the caravels. Salvaging these materials became a priority. Obissasu collected the scrap timber and sought a nail or two from Fernandes to repair his canoe's splintered joins. The return voyage and the spread of knowledge with the storm behind them, Obissasu loaded his canoe with Portuguese goods and set a course eastward. This homeward journey differed from the outward leg. The northeast trade winds, blowing steadily from the inland plateau toward the coast, gave added speed beneath wind-filled sails. Yet currents ran swift near river mouths, and shifting sandbars threatened to strand an unwary paddler. Using knowledge gained from previous voyages, Obissasu navigated around known hazards, relying on subtle swirls in the water to mark submerged channels. As the canoe paddled into the mouths of the Niger's estuaries, the crew spread word of their Portuguese encounter. Village elders in Ogbus gathered on riverbanks, marveling at Venetian beads and the gleam of European iron. Local blacksmiths examined copper bracelets with covetous eyes, plotting to replicate the metalwork in their own forges. Traders from Isan and Afamai polities ventured closer to the river mouth, curious to negotiate their own voyages to Portuguese caravels. The network of coastal trade, once governed by a handful of seasoned merchants, now buzzed with competition and anticipation. Seeds of transformation in the interior. News of Obaseju's cargo spread further still. The bronze casters of Benin City took note of the iron nails and hinges, immediately drafting plans for larger palace doors inlaid with foreign metal. Ohianwan traders agreed to ship more palm oil westward, hoping to secure a regular supply of glass beads and copper. At the Oba's court, Oba Ezegi reviewed reports from Obisazu and another trader, Ogo Ijibu, who had voyaged to Elmina's fort on the Gold Coast. The OBA realized that Portuguese presence wasn't fleeting. They were laying the groundwork for sustained exchange, maritime alliances, and the possibility of firearms that could reshape regional power balances. Yet in these first exchanges lay uncertainties. Would the Portuguese demand land concessions? Could coastal forts draw resources away from inland networks? Would European diseases follow their ships, decimating local populations? These questions lingered as Obisasu stepped ashore at Ujo, unloading his cargo for the eager crowd. The beads were sung into song. The bracelets were displayed at market stalls. And the timber scraps were stored carefully in canoes bound for inland villages, that as night falls on the delta. You might ponder what these early voyages truly signified. Were they simple trade missions, an exercise in barter and curiosity, or the harbingers of deeper entanglements? How would the intricate web of Benin's neighboring polities adapt to the presence of European technology, religion, and commerce? Your journey with Obisasu ends here, on the shifting mudbanks, where water meets land, where old traditions brush against new influences. Yet the story is far from complete. In the next section, we will follow the tale of Nupe Ayatia's mission to Lagos and the ripples his voyage sent through palace intrigue and coastal politics. At dawn's first light, you find yourself in the makeshift harbor of Lagos, in a modest fishing village of stilt houses and wooden piers, watching as Nupe Ayatia steps ashore. His canoe, now half empty of its cargo of ivory tusks and beads, bumps gently against the mud. Ayatea, a tall man with a steady gaze and row of scars across his forearms, disembarks under the watchful eyes of its Sekiri fishermen. Their nets, still heavy with last night's catch, lie draped over wooden racks. Salt-caked oars rest nearby, reminders of the long journey from the Niger Delta's eastern fringes. Ayatea's mission here is twofold: to deliver a letter from Oba Ezegi, praising the Portuguese for their recent assistance against Ijibu raiders, and to negotiate an exchange of copper manila sluice bracelets used as currency for muskets that Portuguese traders promised on their last visit. The letter, sealed with beeswax and stamped with the Oba's emblem, carries political weight. It arrives at a moment when coastal alliances are shifting. The Oba seeks to shore up support among the Itsekiri and Ilaj peoples, ensuring that Benin influence remains preeminent even as Portuguese power grows. The Itsekiri intermediary state is greeted by Chief Olumide, an Itsekiri elder wearing an intricately woven cap of red and yellow raffia. Olumide's deputy, a wiry young man named Iban, leads Ayatea through the Lozlang buildings to a clearing where a dozen Itsekiri traders have assembled. They recline on mats beneath palm fronds, drinking palm wine from clay bowls and nibbling on boiled plantains. As Ayatea approaches, Iban produces a tick table and sets the Oba's letter in the center, next to a pile of copper manilas each weighing nearly half a kilogram. Olumide speaks in a firm voice, addressing Ayatea as brother. From the heartland, he praises the Oba's victories and the stability that Benin's administration brings to Delta trade. Yet his expression turns pensive as he mentions the Portuguese arrival at nearby Focados Creek and the construction of a small wooden stockade. At Okpata Island, they ask us to supply yams for their garrisons, he says, and to send porters of purple. They claim it will enrich us, but their demands grow each season. Ayatea nods. He understands these tensions intimately. His homeland relies on Delta produce, while coastal communities seek Benin's protection against Ijibu and Yoruba incursions. He slides the letter across the table and inquires about the promised muskets. Our partners in Benin City hear that you've acquired a dozen matchlocks, he says. We wish to purchase 8. Iban scoops up to manillas and weighs them in his palm, then passes them to Ayatea. For per musket, he replies. We procure them from Fernandez's agent, Captain Boldeas. His tone hints at both opportunity and caution. But we request your assistance in delivering 500 baskets of gari when next you return. They value local cassava bread more than cowrie shells. The dance of diplomacy and commerce you watch as Ayatea considers the offer. On one hand, matchlocks could strengthen Benin's eastern defenses. On the other, diverting cassava flour could strain his own people, who depend on that staple. He chooses to negotiate 6 baskets on delivery of the first musket. The remainder, upon confirmation of its performance in the field. This middle ground pleases the Itsekiri, who clap and pour more palm wine. Negotiations in such contexts blend commerce and ritual. After sealing the agreement, Ayatea and Olumide move to the edge of the clearing. There Iban has laid out a strip of goatskin on the ground and drawn chalk lines dividing space for offerings. Stones from the riverbank, shells, cola nuts, and smoked fish are arranged in geometric patterns on homage to the sea god Olukan's children. Ayatea sprinkles a handful of cola dust along the lines, whispering prayers for fair winds and prosperous alliances. Only then do the Itsekiri elders dip their fingers in palm wine and clink their bowls against the goatskin, sealing the pact. Hidden currents in Lagos while these formalities unfold. A more subtle drama plays out behind the scenes. Word reaches Ayatea that a band of Yoruba canoe traders, led by Aloy Ogunmakin of Ijebu Ode, has slipped into the lagoon under cover of darkness. They seek to cut a clandestine deal for palm oil with a Portuguese factor bypassing its Sikri middlemen and, by extension, Benin's influence. Ayatea learns this through a discreet whisper from a Delta woman selling smoked fish near the canoe landing. Faced with this news, Ayatea must choose, alert Olumide and risk stirring conflict, or let the traders pass unchallenged, preserving peaceful ties but eroding Benin's monopoly on coastal commerce. He decides on a third path. That evening he meets Aloy Ogunmakin on a rickety pier lit by torches. The Yoruba trader dressed in indigo cloth patterned with white crescents. Ayatea, a share of profits if he facilitates the palm oil exchange. His lips curve in a half smile. Benin's traders are too slow for us these days. Ayatea listens silently, weighing loyalty against opportunity. He replies, "My path lies with my king, but I recognize the tides that shift beneath the water." He offers Ogunmakin a single manila as a token of friendship but declines to broker the larger deal. As Ogunmakin paddles away under a sliver of moon, Ayatea knows this small gesture may redirect Yoruba commissar breed resentment. Portuguese fortifications and local reactions. Meanwhile, along the lagoon's northeastern shore, carpenters labor. On a stockade of dark teak-fought snow, Jorge de Lagos, its palisades rise above the mangrove roots, reinforced with iron spikes smelted in Portugal and shipped in sections. Cannons are mounted on swivel carriages, aimed toward the water channels. Portuguese flags, bearing crosses and armillary spheres, flutter in the breeze. Local villagers approach the fort under truce flags, bringing baskets of yams and fish. They trade liberally for gunpowder stored in wooden barrels, but they do so at a guarded distance, each exchange overseen by armed sentries. Some elders smile, anticipating improved security against raiders. Others whisper anxieties. They fear these fortifications could become focal points for European territorial claims. Displacing indigenous authority over the coast, Ayatea visits the fort at Alumide's behest, entering the wooden gates alongside an Itsekiri delegation. Inside, he meets Captain Baldeus, a barrel-chested man in a steel breastplate, missing 2 teeth. Baldeus removes his helmet and accepts the Arbor's letter, reading it carefully. He welcomes Ayatea's proposal to increase Manila deliveries, and promises early shipment of matchlocks. But when Ayatea inquires about bolt-action spring mechanisms, then cutting-edge in Europe, Baldeus laughs off the idea as unnecessary for Delta skirmishes. This casual dismissal rankles Ayatea. He wonders if the Portuguese genuinely underestimate the complexity of regional conflicts or simply wish to maintain dependence on outdated weapons, ensuring continued demand. The answer remains unclear. Coastal networks and overlapping loyalties. Ayatea departs the fort. You sense that Lagos and the Greater Delta stands at a crossroads. Multiple networks overlay one another. Traditional riverine trade among its Sekri, lively coastal commerce with Yoruba and Nupe traders, and growing European maritime interests. Each network has its own logic, its own demands, and its own ambitions. Traders like Ayatea must navigate all three, shifting allegiances as conditions change. On his way back to his canoe, Ayatea pauses at a market stall where an Egba potter is selling clay cooking pots glazed with smoky patterns. He buys a simple vessel and inquires about the potter's thoughts on the Portuguese forts. The potter lowers his voice. "They pay well for our work, but they ask us to bring pots packed with sand for ballast. Some say it's to weigh their ships, others say it's to deplete our clay reserves." The implication is clear. Every measure, no matter how mundane, ripples through local economies and resource pools. Preparing for the return journey as night falls over Lagos's wooden walkways, Ayatea returns to his canoe and gathers his crew. They share a modest meal of fish stew and yams, passing around the clay pot until each man has taken a drink. Ayatea outlines the plan. Deliver 6 matchlocks to Benin City within 10 days. Procure additional manillas from Wari on the return, and avoid the lagoon's western channels, where storms and bandits have become common. He also instructs a younger crew member, Abu, to sketch a map of the new Portuguese stockade, its location relative to traditional fishing grounds. This map, tedious to produce on palm leaf parchment, will prove invaluable to Benin's navigators and war chiefs, who fear that the forts might one day control access to the delta's interior.